Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me correctly. My name is Alejandra Capozzo. I am the GFRA CEO. And today I want to welcome you to the first symposium hosted together between the Global Foot and Mouth Disease Research Alliance, the GFRA, and the European Commission for Foot and Mouth Disease, EuFMD. Today we will discuss together epidemiology and advancing banks in America. We want to hear all the American voices, so please feel comfortable to follow the meeting in your own language. By clicking below the screen, you have the interpretation button and you can pick up the language. And then you can also write your questions in the Q&A button, and you can do that either in Spanish or in English. So, as I told you, this is the first virtual joint meeting between the GFRA and the EuFMD. The GFRA and the EuFMD are the two leading global organizations networking in research and development on FMD and supporting eradication efforts worldwide. We are proud of the success of this entrepreneurship. We have registered more than 500 participants from all over the world, as you can see there. And most of the attendees are, of course, from America, being the US the most represented from North America and Argentina in South America. We have representation from different sectors, including scientists, professionals, working on regulation, independent veterinarians, and also the industry. As you probably know, there is an ongoing discussion about the possibility of shortly stopping vaccination in South America. These are the polls from our registration form, and you can see opinions are even between yes or no, while half of the attendees still not have an opinion. In most cases, a need for more information was requested. So here we are taking up the discussion on this matter from a scientific point of view. So together with Teresa de los Santos, another GFRA member, Fabricio Rosso and Nadia Rumich from the EuFMD, we welcome you to this meeting and hope you enjoy a fruitful discussion. Hope this symposium is a perfect opportunity to discuss the scope of risk analysis and advancing banks in our mission. So please enjoy the meeting. And I give the word to Fabricio.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. I'm Fabrizio Rosso, Deputy Executive Secretary of the EuFMD. Good afternoon and good morning or good evening all. And I'm very glad that with the joint collaboration between the GFRA and the EuFMD, we managed to organize this regional meeting for the America, overcoming, I should say, the difficulties that we have in this COVID time for meeting in person. Which is very bad, not having that possibility. But I believe we are all taking challenges and as opportunities to identify new ways to improve the networks between scientists and experts that can be then used beyond this difficult time. So the meeting has been organized in connection and also hosted in a virtual environment created for the recent EuFMD open session with the title Livelihood at Risk in a Faster World. Which was focusing more on monitoring of risks, improved surveillance, prevention, control, and emergency preparedness. And I'm pleased to see that very good speakers and the topics in the agenda of this meeting are very much complementary to the themes of the open session. In this regard, considerations on how improved surveillance can properly address risk changes and risk forecasts is certainly relevant to ensure early warning, but also provide evidence of disease freedom, and also relevant to ensure cost-benefit deployment of resources into the field. On the other hand, how policies and preparedness planning should ensure a response and greater resilience during crisis is important, and how vaccine reserves or mechanisms to ensure availability of quality vaccines, such as pre-qualification procedures for vaccines, can improve proper response, but also I think would be also relevant to discuss how prioritize the application of available vaccines when resources or vaccines are limited. And I believe there is so much to learn from COVID for FMD disease management, and probably also the other way around on how to prioritize resources, how to streamline the availability of vaccines, ensuring their safety and efficacy, but also how to ensure business continuity during crisis, the importance of having a global surveillance for antigenic characterization of new lineages, or the relevance of understanding and forecasting movement, animal movement in our case, as well as the importance of behavior change and biosecurity. So I hope you will have a great, we will have a great session. I will leave you to the meeting, and I just would like to thank very much Alessandra Capozzo and Teresa de los Santos, and the EuFMD team, Melissa McClose, Pam Allinger, and Kees van Manen for the technical support, Alessandra Alviti and Ludovic Canela for the logistic assistance, and Nadia Rumic for all the support and coordination provided for this conference. And also for the other regional meeting organized for Asia and Southeast Asia on the 25th of March, that you are all very welcome to attend, and information are available on the website, and I believe also will be provided during this meeting. Thank you, and back to you, Alejandra.
Thank you, Fabricio. And yes, we will announce the upcoming meetings at the end of our symposium today. Thank you so much. So just to start, I'm going to introduce you the first session that will be focused on epidemiology and risk analysis. And it will be hosted by Dr. Melissa McClose, who is a pillar and coordinator at the EuFMD and FAO co-chair of the FMD working group. Also Pam Hallinger, a veterinary epidemiologist working for the EuFMD, and our colleague Guido Koenig. He's a researcher at INTA in Argentina. He's the head of the molecular FMD epidemiology lab, and also a former president of the GFRA. So Guido, Pam, and Melissa, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I will be the first because I will introduce my friend, Dr. Andres Perez. He worked, he's a veterinarian. He worked many years for the National Research Council in Argentina, and also in the University of California in Davis. But now he is serving for the University of Minnesota. I will need to read the name of his post because they are too long, but he is professor. That was easy, but he's also endowed chair of Global Animal Health and Food Security, and also director of the Center of Animal Health and Food Safety. He is collaborating with the OIE for the capacity building and veterinary service. And he's also involved in many projects around the world about field epidemiology and capacity building and prevention. So I am very glad to present him now. And I thank you very much for, we can say, coming. Andres?
Thank you very much, Guido, for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and looking forward to engaging in this in a very interesting conversation with you all.
Excellent. So I think that we can pass to the first presentation from Andres.
Thank you for the time and the opportunity to make a presentation to this conference. It's a pleasure to attend remotely. So here we are going to share some basic foundational concepts related with approaches used for surveillance of foot and mouth disease. The objectives of this presentation will be to review some of those general concepts and definitions related to animal disease surveillance, and also to explore some of the pros and cons associated with the design of different types of surveillance systems, particularly with relation to foot and mouth disease. Before we start, I would like to share some papers, some material that could be helpful and has been used in the preparation of this presentation. There is a report that was produced by the International Conference on Animal Health Surveillance a few years ago that reviews some of these concepts, and that also has reached some consensus about the use of some of the terms in the veterinary community. This paper is a bit old, but I think it does a really good job by Dr. Thurmond. It does a very good job describing the attributes and the ways to evaluate the surveillance system. And then finally, of course, the terrestrial animal health code, particularly in relation with the foot and mouth disease and the surveillance chapters, where the standards in terms of international regulations have been presented. So first of all, we'll be using this working definition of what a surveillance system is. But briefly, we should think about the surveillance system as a diagnostic test. A diagnostic test that is applied at a population level, large level, could be a region, could be a farm, with a given objective. And with that given objective, there is that analogy between a diagnostic test applied to an individual and then a surveillance system with a given purpose, with a given intention, applied to a population. The difference between surveillance and other terms that sometimes are used similarly to surveillance, like monitoring, is that in a surveillance system, there should be always a purpose, there should always be an intention, and there should always be a pre-designed action associated with finding the objective of that surveillance system. So if we continue with that analogy between a surveillance system and a diagnostic test, we can start by considering what are the attributes of a diagnostic test. And among those attributes, let's stay for a minute in what's the purpose of the diagnostic test, why the diagnostic test has been designed, and then at the end, whether the way we are using that diagnostic test also fits the intended purpose of that design. And then in the middle of those two attributes, we have all these attributes that relate with that evaluation of the diagnostic test, how well the diagnostic test is performing and how much repeatable are the results and other attributes of that test. Well, similarly, we could also consider the attributes of a surveillance system. And when evaluating a surveillance system, any design, any system that we may have implemented should be able to be characterized in terms of these attributes here. And of course, the diagnostic sensitivity and the diagnostic specificity are important, and you can see the analogy there, also with reproducibility and repeatability of the diagnostic test. But then we get into these three attributes here at the end, marked in red: efficiency, value and purpose, and timelines of detection and reporting that are extremely important. Timeliness of detection and reporting refers to how quickly the identification of a condition, disease, or pathogen is made. And this is because, think about foot and mouth disease. If we have an introduction in a free region or country, eventually we're going to detect that introduction. Eventually it's going to be picked up somehow. So if we were to consider only the sensitivity of the surveillance system and the specificity, eventually it's going to be perfect because we're going to detect anything. The issue is really how long it's going to take to make that detection. And in terms of the specificity, the issue is how many false alarms we may have in order to be able to detect timely a true introduction. So For that reason, timeliness of detection and reporting, timeliness is very important when defining the attribute of surveillance system, even over the sensitivity and specificity of that same surveillance system. Efficiency is also extremely important, and in general, it refers to the idea that normally we wouldn't design a surveillance system only for one single disease. The surveillance system is implemented for a given number of diseases or conditions, and then we try to maximize the use of resources. So any of those diseases, any of those conditions of interest could be identified by the use of our surveillance system. And then finally, value and purpose relates to that initial definition of surveillance system. So what is a surveillance system? What's the purpose of the surveillance system? Why I have designed it? And what are the actions that I'm going to take in the event of a detection? Everything should have been predefined, and then I will design my surveillance system considering that value and purpose. And there have been many approaches that have been proposed for implementation of surveillance systems. And there are, of course, pros and cons associated with each of them, and different meanings. Sometimes some of these terms are used with different meanings, and sometimes there is a little bit of confusion about what these terms may have in common and what may be the differences between them. And here we're gonna talk briefly about active surveillance, passive surveillance, enhanced passive surveillance, syndromic surveillance, random sampling, risk-based or targeted sampling, and of course there are many other definitions, terms, or approaches that could be used in the design of a surveillance system. Again, always considering those attributes and that purpose, that intended purpose. So when we compare active versus passive surveillance approaches, basically the most important difference between those two definitions are in where the primary responsibility of sampling and reporting lies. And in general, one would assume that when we are talking about active surveillance, the expectation is that the official veterinary services, the public sector, will be primarily responsible for conducting those activities, so actively searching for the event, whereas in a passive surveillance system, the expectation is that there will be some spontaneous reporting coming to the government, coming to the veterinary services, coming typically from the private sector. Because of that difference, the cost, one would expect that at least for the public sector, of course, an active surveillance system would be a relatively high cost compared to a passive surveillance system where most of the responsibility lies in the private sector, for which the public cost of such a system is relatively low. Now, of course, there are challenges associated with each of them in terms of planning and implementation. For a passive surveillance system, typically the most important challenge is that it requires a fluent, strong communication between the private and public sector, and a strong commitment from the private sector in terms of complying with regulations and engaging into the purpose of that surveillance system. In turn, regarding an active surveillance system, the challenge there in terms of planning and implementation is that many times, in addition to that cost, is that the public sector may not have access to the data, animals, and farms, and knowledge as frequently, as common, and as fluently as the passive surveillance approach would have with the private sector. For that reason, one may think that an active surveillance system may be a first option when designing a surveillance system, and sometimes it does create a false idea of safety. However, we also need to keep in mind that the active surveillance system that implies such a commitment from the government and in the use of resources also has the limitation of accessing to the data and to the knowledge that the private sector typically has. When we get into a comparison between random and targeted or risk-based surveillance approaches, there is a similar analogy here. the assumption for a random-based sampling is that there is no previous knowledge, and that the selection of individuals to be tested will be conducted randomly. So initially, any individual will have the same chance of selection that any other individual within the population, in order to avoid any introduction of potential bias. And in general, there is the feeling that by conducting a random selection, the scientific soundness of the approach will be higher compared to other type of approaches. However, in a risk-based surveillance approach, the assumption is that it's just the opposite. We will try to bias the sampling design towards an increase in the probability of detection. So it's not that we are trying to avoid biases. We are, in a sense, we are trying to use those biases to play in our favor. So what are the factors, what are the conditions that may increase the chances of finding a positive individual, of finding a pathogen? And then we are going to selectively sample those individuals in order to maximize our chances of detection. For a random surveillance, random sampling design, the main application should be to estimate probabilities. So for example, estimate prevalence, estimate coverage of a vaccination campaign, estimate any probability. If you want to estimate a probability, then you need to go with a random sampling design. However, if your idea is to maximize the probability of detection, early detection and demonstration of freedom from disease, risk-based approaches may help you to increase that probability of detection, and sometimes even decreasing the cost associated with the implementation of that system. Of course, again, there are pros and cons in terms of planning and implementation of these approaches. In terms of random design, the most important challenge is that if your intention is to identify an introduction of foot-and-mouth disease, it's really difficult to come up with an acceptable design. Just to use an example, when we follow the design, the prevalence design, and the minimum level of infection that one would like to identify in a country, and apply that for early detection of foot-and-mouth disease, that's 1%, 10% of population, the animals, number of farms, number of individuals, then that probability of detection, if you think about 1% of the farms in a country, is still way lower than what you would detect in case of an epidemic. So if you have 10,000 farms infected, then you may, depending on the size of the country, you may still not achieve that minimum prevalence design. So it's really complex when you're trying to use the design for early detection of a pathogen. In turn, effectiveness of a risk-based approach is associated with certain assumptions that may be related with the idea of garbage in and garbage out. So if we make a mistake when biasing our design to inform that surveillance system, then probably we'll be missing the point, we'll be missing the target, and we'll be actually losing the benefit of having a random system, and in turn also missing the opportunity of increasing the probability of detection. So we need to be very careful when designing a risk-based approach, so that those variables that we use to target the surveillance system are truly associated with the disease and with the condition. Now, all of that said, think about an opportunity, a time in which one has lost his or her car keys in the house. Well, would you randomly sample your apartment to find those lost keys, lost car keys? Well, the answer is no. And the analogy, if you want to identify hidden case of foot-and-mouth disease and unreported case of foot-and-mouth disease, normally you would guess that you wouldn't randomly sample a country to try to find that case. When you're trying to find your car keys, is actually do a targeted sampling. So you will go specifically to those places where you think that there are higher chances of finding the keys, and then you're gonna selectively look at those places. Well, in this analogy, that's exactly what you would do if you're trying to identify an early introduction of foot-and-mouth disease. Then we have these are two concepts, enhanced and syndromic surveillance. And in general, in terms of the application for foot-and-mouth disease, we could think about these two options as a slight modification of what a passive surveillance system would be. In an enhanced surveillance system, passive surveillance efforts are directed to increase communication with stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, producers, to report certain types of disease or by actively following suspected disease reports. In a syndromic surveillance system, passive surveillance efforts are targeted to identification and reporting of certain specific syndromes by the producers that are followed by an active surveillance for confirmation. So that, for example, may apply to a syndrome like a vesicular disease, and how those cases in which vesicular disease is found in association with other factors are selectively targeted by an active surveillance system. So how would the combination of these type of approaches may look like? Well, one may think about the implementation of an enhanced passive surveillance system that will provide background information to the government that will help to estimate the sensitivity and specificity of the system, and that has a relatively low cost for implementation because producers are normally taking the actions and doing the activities that require for implementation of such an enhanced syndromic passive system. And then that enhanced syndromic passive surveillance system would be supplemented by some specific targeted active surveillance system that will be used to fill the gaps that may have been identified in the surveillance system. So regions, type of farms, certain systems that may have not been sampled so frequently as others, confirms certain suspects that may be coming from the passive systems, selectively target areas that have been identified as high risk, and in conclusion, make a more efficient use of those limited resources that the government may have for a surveillance system. So, again, there are some challenges, pros and cons associated with the implementation of each of the systems. One of the challenges that we're going to see is whether countries would be ready to accept that non-random is not necessarily bad, despite the scientific evidence that we can provide. There is that feeling that any surveillance activity, any scientific work should imply this concept of randomness, when scientific evidence may go against that. There will be a presentation after this one in which Manuel Sanchez will show some examples of how some ways to apply the targeted based systems have been used in Latin America. And I think that's extremely positive and helpful and good to see. But then at the same time, we know that sometimes takes a little bit to some governments to adapt to this new reality. And just an example, think about all the issues that risk-based trade approaches have had for exporting of the bone beef and foot-and-mouth disease, despite the evidence that have been presented about the nil risk that the activity represents. So with that, I think we have reviewed all the expectations for this presentation, the general concepts and definitions related to animal disease surveillance, and the pros and cons associated with the design of different types of surveillance systems in relation to foot-and-mouth disease. Many thanks to Dr. Daniela Schettino and Dr. Sol Perez Aguirre-Urralde from the Center for Animal Health and Food Safety, who have helped in the creation of this material. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andres, for this presentation, which gave a great introduction to some of the issues that need to be considered when designing or implementing or evaluating surveillance for foot-and-mouth disease. Now we're collecting questions from the audience in the Q&A button below. And after the next talk, we'll have a live session with both speakers where we can have some discussion on this. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Manuel Sanchez Vazquez. Manuel is an epidemiologist specialized in public policy. For more than 20 years, his work has been focused on animal and public health through positions in the private sector, academia, and international organizations, including OIE, PAHO, and the WHO, and including projects in more than 30 countries in the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. He's now working at PANAFTOSA, the Pan American FMD Center under PAHO and WHO, where he's been since 2013, and he's the coordinator of the epidemiology area. His presentation today is entitled Examples of Targeted Surveillance Approaches for Foot and Mouth Disease in South America. And Manuel, I think we're playing a video, but did you want to say anything first?
Thank you, Melissa. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I think that is an interesting opportunity to present out there what we are doing in the region. So thanks.
Thank you. And I think the video should come here in a moment. There we go. Over to Manuel on the video.
Hola, hello. My name is Manuel Sanchez. I am the coordinator of the area of epidemiology in PANAFTOSA, the Pan American FMD Center, which is part of PAHO, WHO. It is a pleasure to be part of this event, organized in conjunction by the Global FMD Research Alliance at the EuFMD, and where we are going to be able to look closer at the reality in this region of FMD. Over the next 15 minutes, and following the talk from Professor Andres Perez, we are going to talk a bit about the surveillance of FMD in South America, also about the method for risk-based surveillance, and more in particularly about multivariate techniques to combine risk variables, and how we can apply these methods to assist for risk-based design. I'm going to start giving a very brief overview of the FMD surveillance in South America. In South America, countries and zones, they are in different stages regarding the recognition of FMD3, and they will apply the surveillance to consolidate, maintain, or progress in this status. We can consider that we have a passive surveillance as a baseline where the private sector, particularly the producers, the farmers, they need to identify something going on in the farm, and they need to be able to report that to the official veterinary services. Also, we have active surveillance, particular surveys, which complement the work done in passive surveillance to demonstrate absence of FMD transmission. And we have also the surveys done for immunity, what we can call the post-vaccination monitoring. Besides, the countries, they do other surveillance in risk properties, on slaughterhouses, livestock events, and also during transportation. And also they are all looking for strengthening and maintain the capacity for the diagnostic. With the information provided by the countries to the COSALFA for 2016 to 2019, we are presenting here in this map those events of vesicular syndrome that was attended. This map is an indicator of the capacity for early detection for FMD disease. In this map, we have the work done by the countries regarding active surveillance, particularly on immunity surveys that we can see them in a solid color, and in bars, the viral transmission surveys. We can see that they are already a component of risk-based surveys, risk-based surveillance, and we can see that in, for example, in Ecuador, we can see those areas that they were the focus of specific surveys on specific years, also in Peru, and also in Brazil, that they did the last survey on the borders. Now I would like to talk about combining variables to define risk. As Professor Andrés Pérez has already mentioned in the previous talk, risk-based surveillance has a lot of advantages, no? For example, to be cost-effective, it might increase the sensitivity, but you are also demonstrated to have some knowledge about the risk and the population. But there are also some challenges, and for example, for me, one of the main challenges is to have particularly that information regarding the distribution of the risk. It needs to be reliable, it needs to be exhaustive, complete, and up to date. For that, obviously, we need to have good information systems and databases. Another of the challenges, once we have the information, is how to combine all that information that identify the risk. And we have a lot of strategies, so we can use graphical modeling, for example, with machine learning. We can use expert opinions, and we will have to weigh the different risks, and that is a challenge. Also, we have strategies, multi-criteria, and also multivariate analysis. That is the one that I'm going to present over the next slides. With multivariate models, we want to explain how a set of variables are associated with each other. These models are not assuming a dependent variable response, but we want to treat all variables as independent, explanatory. In that way, multivariate techniques, such as principal components and factor analysis, use dimension reductions to facilitate the identification of uncorrelated subgroups of variables, that is, the principal components or factors. We assume that the observations are in a multidimensional Euclidean space, like a cloud, and these techniques seek to compress them into simple components that represent the essential variation. With hierarchical clustering, we want to aggregate groups of units in such a way that the variance within the group is minimized by increasing the variance between the clusters. As an example of the application of these techniques to a risk-based surveys, I want to present this example that was designed between Panatosa and the official veterinary services of Brazil, and was specifically conceived for Paraná. That was a state that was in transition from being free with vaccination to free without vaccination. The overall objectives of this study was to demonstrate the absence of FMD transmission in the state of Paraná. And to do that, what we wanted is to categorize the 399 municipalities of Paraná according to the risk of FMD, whether they were present or absent of the risk indicators. The context of the study is that FMD has not been detected for a long time, over 15 years. There was a continuous surveillance in place, as I explained at the beginning, through different strategies. Vaccination was no longer applied. It was a state that it was in transition to be free without vaccination. So we consider that it was unlikely that there was historical residual presence of FMD. And the risk scenario that we were proposing was related to a recent FMD transmission that might have been undetected. The data sources that we use was related in that way for risk indicator associated with the probability of introduction and transmission, combined with those indicators related to vulnerability. And the data that we used, the data available, was the register for rural properties, cattle movement records for the last previous years, and also vaccination coverage for the previous years. And that information was translated into variables for our models. In that way, we included variables related to the population distribution, including number of properties, total number of animals, and the average number of bovines per property. Also related to variables with the movements, according to the number of movements, number of contacts, and number of animal moves. And also information related to the vaccine coverage in the previous 2 years that was related to 4 different campaigns. The method that we use to combine these indicators is a principal component analysis combined with hierarchical clustering. This methodology is very well described. We use a R package, Factor Minder, and I put here the website where you can find all the background related to this methodology and several examples. What we wanted actually is exhaustively discriminate the different clusters of municipalities according to the similarity regarding the risk factors. And we came up with different clusters that are clusters that represent the similarities but no spatial clustering. We can see here in this diagram what is the results of the principal components analysis, not the first stage that we did, and is an indicator of how the different indicators, the different variables that we use behave regarding the variability. So we see that all the information related to the vaccination appears that with a degree of correlation. No? We see all, they are pointing, according to the arrows, they are pointing in the same direction. So we will see here the municipalities that had a higher coverage, vaccine coverage. Also, the information related to the movements, either number of contacts or animal move or movements in total, are also more or less pointing in the same direction, and a bit separate appears the number of farms. This is how we are going to see the variation in our database. And in this other diagram, we can see already the cluster identified in the analysis, and the 6 different clusters, and where what we see the dots, the points are related to the municipalities that they will belong to the different clusters. So this would be the cluster that we have identified through this methodology. This is how we see in the map the distribution of the different categorization of the municipalities according to the clusters. So we see that we can see the different clusters all over the state. So there is not a special cluster. The clusters are identified according to the similarities of the indicators. That is something that is important to bear in mind. And just to help with the interpretation of the clusters and this methodology, I just want to explain some examples, some of the clusters. For example, we can see cluster 1 here. We can see cluster 1 here with this color red, and we can see here where it's located according to our dimensions. And when we see also in the dimensions where the indicators were located, we could see here that the information related to vaccine coverage was in this part, in this part of the dimensions. So we will see that the municipalities that will have good vaccine coverage, in this case compared with the others, they will be in this part of the dimensions. What happened with this cluster? That is on the opposite side. So we can assume that this cluster might have been related to poor vaccine coverage compared with the other municipalities. And there is another way to see it, and that is also an output of the study, and it's with a B-test. When we have a B-test that has a negative result, it's indicating that there is a negative association with those variables. As we can see that visually, the B-test is also confirming that information. So there is a negative association regarding the proportion and the animal vaccinated. We can actually compare the results, the mean average of animals or proportion of animals vaccinated compared with the overall average for the whole study. Now, for example, with the cluster 2, that is this color that is orange or brown, which is located here, what we think that we have here. So we will assume that we will have good vaccine coverage for those municipalities, and also look at here. We know here that those are related to the ones around here. They will be related to a lot of movements in and out, a lot of contacts, and also with a lot of farms. And here we are far from here, so we are on the opposite scale. So this cluster is going to be around here, so should be related to municipalities with low number of movements and maybe less farms and less animals. And that is also what is confirmed by the V-test. The V-test has a positive association with the information related with the vaccination, and negative association with movements in and out, number of farms and number of bovines. That is what we can see also visually. So basically this cluster is defined by a good vaccine coverage and with lower risk of introduction and spread, because it have less properties and less movements in and out. And what do you think that we can say about other clusters? For example, cluster number 6, that is around here. So when we look at the location within the dimensions, this cluster, those municipalities, and we see the information regarding the indicators. So those clusters might be related, those municipalities might be related to municipalities with a lot of movements, probably with a lot of bovines, a lot of farms. We can check that with also with the analysis from the V-test, and obviously what we see visually, we can see that also with the V-test. So this cluster is positively associated with a lot of movements in and out, the presence of a lot of farms, a lot of bovines. So this would be the characteristics, the main characteristics of this cluster number 6. So after all this exercise with this study, what we were able to categorize all the different municipalities of the state according to the risk with information that we have on those indicators. And I didn't explain all the other 6 clusters because we don't have time, but we have again the graph here where we can see it. And it was clear that we could identify the cluster 2 with greater vaccine coverage, so less vulnerability, and also there are municipalities with less movements and less farms and less animals, so also with less risk of transmission and introduction compared with the other cluster. And that is how we categorized the information for the study. So we had all these municipalities, we were considered at lower risk compared with the other municipalities that belongs to the other clusters. Do we have more information, or we can work also with experts? We can do a risk categorization for each of the clusters. But for this exercise, what we did is just categorize in lower risk, the ones that they were in cluster number 2, and higher risk, the one that the municipalities that they were in the other clusters. And that is how it looks like the final, where we are now presenting in green those municipalities that they were part of the cluster number 2, the one that we consider of lower risk, and the one in red are the ones that they were part of the other cluster, and we are considering of higher risk. Doesn't mean that they had a high risk, but they are considered higher risk compared with the municipalities in the cluster 2. Muchas gracias. Thanks a lot for your attention. I know that there was a lot of information presented over these 15-16 minutes, but I hope that it was useful, and now we are going to be able to take some questions and discuss some of the results presented here.
Thank you. And then we invite all the other moderators and speakers for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Manuel, for an excellent and very thought-provoking presentation. And I think maybe we could start off with a follow-up question specific to your presentation from Aldo Decker. He's asking, he said, Manuel, your study was not able to weight risk for every hazard that was identified. So do you assume that each hazard or movement of animals in and out carried the same risk? Could you elaborate a little bit more on how you handled those risks?
As I explained in the study, I think that is a kind of way of looking at the risk in macro. So if you want to go further and you want to discriminate between in and out movements, you can still pursue that purpose. But as you can see, the main idea here was to identify where we assume that are the municipalities with a higher risk, or in this case with a lower risk, compared with the others, no, with the other 5 clusters in this case that we knew that they were at higher risk. As I explained that at the end in the last slide, where we could actually work disgregating more the clusters. We have actually 6 clusters. In some of them, we could get back and look at the study and see, we could see that you could differentiate municipalities where there is more introduction, so where there are more movements in and probably more contact in than out, so that is actually disgregated in this with these techniques. I'm not sure whether I explained that, but you can choose, so you can come up with as much clusters as you want. So you can come up with 15 clusters if you want to disaggregate more your information to do a greater characterization. So that is a trade-off that you do between the data and the interpretation that you want to do. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
If I may add a little bit, because there was another question from Aldo Decker related with that. So just for the conversation here relates to the definition of what the hazard is and what the risk is. So hazard is anything negative, unexpected that we want to detect and actively prevent. For the context of this conversation is foot-and-mouth disease or foot-and-mouth disease. Risk adds a component of probability to that hazard. That's the system should somehow incorporate that probability, and there are some tools that can help us on that, like most notably risk assessment techniques, and that's where Manuel was going with his explanation. I think my connection is bad, and he may have not worked. Sorry if that was the case.
Thanks, Andres and Manuel. Maybe I can go next. A number of the questions in the chat box are related to some of the challenges with surveillance and doing, performing surveillance that you can have confidence in the results. Can you comment on the, some of the biggest barriers and challenges to surveillance in the context of the Americas? Manuel, maybe we could start with you, whether it's risk-based or random, the different types of surveillance. Thanks.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We want to think about the challenges to apply a risk-based approach in a country. It's first that you need to understand very well your population, because you are going to look at your population. You are going to that is what you want to investigate. So the population means where are the animals, where are the farms, how about the movements also, know how are they interrelated. This is our base for the population. So you need to have good data on that. So good farm registry for all the different type of farms. We cannot leave out those ones that are small holders, because they might be also important for the risk. And also about the movement. So you need to know how they are interrelated. So that is for me, that is a precondition to be able to apply a risk-based approach. And then to understand the risk. And the risk is also related to the context. What I was presenting in my study, it was a study in the current context of a country that had been free for more than 15 years. So we are not actually looking at a residual risk of FMD. So we are looking at a recent introduction. And that is that is very important because the context is important. In the studies that we used to do 15 years ago, 10 years ago, where we were, or for example, if we are doing something in Venezuela, no, where we assume that the virus is still present, the approach is different. So it's also very important to understand very well what is the context and how the risk is going to be associated with that context. Not sure if I'm going to leave something for Andres. I'm not sure if Andres want to complement that. Because for me, it's also very important the methodology that you are using to combine the data. That's why I wanted to give an example, and there are many. So it's the population, how you understand the risk, and then you have the capacity to do a proper, adequate study considering those risks. Andres is here, otherwise I could.
I was kicked out, Manuel, and I got back. Okay. I'm trying to keep my camera off in case that it helps. I agree with you. So basically, we have the hazard that Aldo was referring to, and then the probability associated with that hazard, which is coming from the risk analysis. And there are many methodologies that could be used depending on availability of the data, preference of the researcher. There are always pros and cons. But really, what we are trying to do here is to play with probabilities. So if you can put a probability and associate that probability to a given factor that serves as a proxy for the disease, then you can use that knowledge to direct your efforts towards that higher probability to maximize the sensitivity of the surveillance system. So it's a concept, it's not a recipe. And then there are multiple ways in which we can play with those concepts to adapt that to the specific needs of the countries.
And just, Melissa, I just want to add something because you were asking about the barriers. And I think that Andres discussed it a bit in his presentation, is the acceptability of these kind of studies. So what is the purpose? Is it something that you are doing as a routine? Is something that you are going to do is to use it for a third party to prove that you don't have a disease or you have a further knowledge about what's happening in your country? So depends on the also why is the purpose of that study. You are going to consider or no a risk-based approach, because the other party needs to be able to accept the methodology at that approach. And that is important, also an important difference between what you will do in academia, something that is risk-based approach looks like very a suitable way to work, and what is happening in real life. Well, maybe a country is not going to accept that study because it's considering that you are leaving out part of the population without testing.
I will endorse that, Manuel. And just to give an example, I think that this will be similar all around the world. But for South America, for example, it has been accepted for some time that most of the risk for many of the countries is at the borders, because in the borders there are a number of conditions that would favor occurrence of the outbreaks. And most of the outbreaks for the last, I don't know, 20 years maybe, have started at the borders. But still, if you were to follow a random surveillance approach, then most of the samples will come from different parts of the country. But because of that feeling that if we do something different, then our trade partners, international organizations may not agree with the approach and may question our approach. We just keep doing the same, which I would argue goes against the best benefit of their own countries. So I totally agree with you that fear of feeling certain reluctance from trade partners is actually causing that negative impact into the way that the countries are facing their surveillance systems.
I will read the next question, which is, how do you compare surveillance systems in the America where countries are very different in size and condition? How do you account for population coverage when quantifying the probability of freedom?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Okay. So for the first question, well, how you compare the surveillance systems. I think that when you are focused on active surveillance, I found that easier to compare because you understand the methodology, the population that was included, and also the parameters that they were used. When you compare active surveillance, I recognize that it's a bit challenging. Also, passive surveillance, I think that is a bit more difficult because what is your indicator? For example, the number of suspicions that they were attended, and what happened with those countries that they have already vesicular stomatitis that when you are in the field are not distinguishable, as it happened, for example, in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, sometimes in Brazil, and even in Argentina. But most of the countries affected would be Central America, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. So those countries, by default, they are going all the time to the field to investigate these events, and they need to collect samples, and in the lab is where they are going to rule out whether it's FMD or vesicular stomatitis. So you compare the amount of sample visits that they do to the farms to investigate vesicular disease with others countries in the region that they don't have vesicular stomatitis, it would look like, okay, the surveillance, the passive surveillance is actually very good in those countries. And definitely it is, but I think that the results are not comparable. We have done many exercises and we came out in the region for a way to at least to standardize a bit the results of passive surveillance to be able to compare it, but they are challenging. And you were asking about vaccine coverage. For me, vaccine coverage also it would be an indicator depending on the context. We use it for this study as a proxy for vulnerability and as a proxy for immunity level. But if you ask me, I would rather prefer to have a population immunity study, post-vaccination monitoring, because I found it more informative. And why? Because for me, vaccine coverage is something that you see in paper. Those are the herds that they were vaccinated out of the population that we have. But you never know what is going to be actually happening in that herd. No? How well has been vaccinated, how well the cold chains was maintained. Is there any idiosyncratic reaction in the animals? Some of them are going to get better immunity. So talking about vaccine coverage, definitely what we try to do in this region is to do population immunity studies. Over.
Excellent. We have a couple of more questions. I think it's for you, Manuel. What are your thoughts on using sensor technology or alternative sampling approach for surveillance? For example, thermo images of animals or environmental samples at markets.
Yeah, I think that as any other tool, I think that they are positive. For example, some of the studies that we have done already try to incorporate a way of incorporating more up-to-date data. So all these technologies could allow you to feed better, to have more up-to-date information, more realistic approach. So I think that it would be a good idea. So particularly for FMD, the thermo scans, I'm not sure what you say in the markets or whatever. Not sure whether it would be that useful. You will need to have a clinical animal, clinical sick animal to be able to detect that. But as a general term, for example, I worked with that years ago in farms to be able to detect what was something going on, particularly on pigs. And I found that useful. So I think that any tool might be useful, and just to decide how to use it. Okay.
So we have one more to Manuel. It's to clarify where when you're looking at risk for introduction or risk for spread if introduced.
Whether I'm looking at risk of introduction or looking at risk of spread.
Or spread if introduced.
Okay. We were looking at both. So as I say, in the context that we were looking at, we thought that we were not looking at all residual present of FMD. So it would have been something, because there is already a system for detection in place. So something that was going to be historical would have been detected, no? So you are looking at something that is happening recently and has not been detected by the system, by the surveillance system. So we were considering both. So what is the risk of introduction? So what are the farms that are receiving more? So for in that case, no, what is the risk of introduction? And also those are contributing more to the spread of the disease. So we were looking at both risk in this study.
Excellent. And there is someone who from a previous question, we talk about vaccination coverage, but the person who made the question clarified that he talked about population of animals, that the confidence that you are observing all the population or most of the population. I imagine that the question is you are getting all the.
Yes, and that is a very important question, and it's one of the preconditions that I said. No, you want to apply something like that, you need to make sure that within this data that you are using as a baseline, you are including all your population. And when I say all, I include all. Sometimes there is a perception that the small herd might not be contributing to the risk, but they should be included in the survey. So it's very important. It's good that they are asking again. Population is important, and you need to consider all your population, particularly when you are doing a risk-based study. Then you will be able to decide whether you are not including for the survey some specific part of the population, but as a baseline, this is where I am starting to build up my study. I need to include all of them. Guido, I also want to make a comment about, because I wasn't sure whether that was clear in my presentation. What I was trying to present, just a tool. I think that I mentioned another 5 examples of methodology that we can use. And I just wanted to give this example because when I face in a risk-based approach, for me it's very important to understand particularly the population. So the first thing that we did here is a characterization based on the risk. So then you need to understand your population, and then you understand the risk, and then you put it together. And that is useful for this and for any other activities that we do in the official veterinary services. I found that characterization an important step to do any surveillance.
So if I can just follow on from that a little bit, Manuel, and you're on the spot a bit, I guess, because Andres doesn't have a good connection today. So so he's answering in the chat and you're answering live.
Okay.
But
okay.
You know, you were describing the risk-based surveillance in the context of detecting an introduction quickly. But can those approaches also, or how can those approaches also be useful in the event of an outbreak when you're now doing surveillance to detect cases once an incursion has happened? And are you working on that within your project?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Normally, you would think that when you have already an outbreak, what you do is just identify what are the farms in the neighborhood and what has been the contact, the tracking. But this risk-based approach is interesting. Also, when you have characterized what is happening in that context, and you want to go beyond, So beyond what you know that are the neighbors and the contact, you want to start to look at other farms that I might have been in the same situation, and because of that, they might also have the disease. In this case, FMD, but it could be avian influenza. I think that is very useful actually to apply that to surveillance, and it's also very useful when you want to plan reopening the business in the meantime that you are still dealing with the outbreaks. That means you are already investigating those other farms that are potentially at risk because they have similarities, and you are ruling out the presence of the virus in those farms. So I think that allows you to go faster in this control, re-eradication of the disease. So I think that is a valid approach, but again, you need to understand very well how the risk is distributed in those farms.
Yeah, I agree with you, because often in the event of an outbreak, there's limited resources for surveillance, and so those can become stretched. And so a risk-based approach can help, or is necessary really, to decide which farms or premises to visit first. Are there any other questions in the chat, Pam?
Well, it looks like we might have time for one last question. And we have a question asking what your thoughts are on the possibility of having a long-term common goal of a surveillance approach for the Americas. And perhaps as a more interim goal, the establishment of a common set of minimum requirements that could be shared and utilized amongst countries. I don't know if Andres.
Andres. I don't know where we have Andres.
I'm concentrating on the answering the written questions because my connection is really bad. I'm not sure it will work. I don't know, a common goal for the entire continent. We tried that a number of times. Not sure if that worked. I'll hand it on to you, Manuel. The connection is really bad.
Okay, thank you, Andres. So, no, and thank you, Pam. I actually think that there is a common goal, although the goal has different approaches, because at the moment the situation in the Americas and South Americas is not the same. So when we are setting up the surveillance, it cannot be the same in a country that is already considered infected, as it is Venezuela, or in a country that is free for decades without vaccination, and it could be Chile. So I think that the common goal is in surveillance is to demonstrate that FMD is not present, but I think that you have different contexts already within the region. So once they are all under the same circumstances, so they are all free without vaccination, maybe it's possible. But at the moment, the goal is slightly different. What was the other question, Pam? The second part of the question? Sorry.
The second part of the question was, as a short-term goal or a short-term possibility, developing a minimum set of surveillance standards or requirements to try to move towards bringing countries together with similar approaches.
I think that we have that actually in the region, and the fact that we have a regional organization, and we have the COSALFA, when every year we discuss what's happening in FMD in the region at political and technical level. I think that has contributed to establish minimal requirements for how our passive surveillance should be. and also about the active surveillance. We have also the indication from the OIE code, terrestrial code, but I think that at regional level, I think that the way we do the things are more or less unified, with some variations, but I think that they are more or less standard. I think that I saw that.
All right, well, it looks like Alejandro is back, and so I'll just go ahead and thank both of our presenters, Manuel and Andres, for excellent presentations and a great discussion of the questions that we've received from the participants, and thank my co-moderators, Melissa and Guido, and turn it back over to Alejandra.
Thank you, Pam. Just to tell you, we are taking 5 minutes recess, just a short interval, and we start with the vaccine banks session. So just take 5 minutes and please come back. And we have much more to discuss. Thank you.
Hello? Hello, do you hear me, Alejandra?
Here we are back. So
Yes.
we're gonna wait for the removal of the plate.
Okay.
Then it's all to you, Teresa, to present the second part.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon, good evening for some of you, people from all over the world. I want to thank you all for participating of this first event and as a joint mission between GFRA and EuFMD. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to the second session of our meeting on vaccine banks. The section is going to have 3 talks and it's going to be moderated by Mariano Pérez Filgueira from Argentina, currently the GFRA scientific director and working at INTA and CONICET in Argentina. Hernando Duque, originally from Colombia, but living in USA. We are colleagues in Plum Island, and he works for the animal APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Agency, in the Department of Agriculture. And he's the manager of the North American FMD bank, vaccine bank. And Dr. Kees van Manen from the Netherlands. He's a senior scientist at the Netherlands Animal Health Service, and he's an animal health officer at EuFMD FAO. Without any further introduction, I offer the floor to Mariano Pérez Filgueira, who's going to start introducing the section and the first speaker. Thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you, Teresa. And just a brief introduction for Dr. Alejandro Rivera. He's a veterinarian. He has a degree on preventive medicine and epidemiology. Most of his professional career, he has been working at the Agricultural Service in Chile, almost for 7 years. And he was responsible for the National System for Surveillance and Control of Diseases. He's a consultant. He has been consultant for the FAO for 2 years. And now he's working as a coordinator of foot and mouth disease area at the Centro Panamericano de Fiebre Aftosa that it's located in Rio de Janeiro. So thank you, Alejandro, for joining us. And please, if you want to introduce your presentation, go ahead. And thank you once again.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias, Mariano. Quiero agradecerle la invitación para participar en esta reunión. Quiero felicitar a la organización porque está saliendo una transmisión magnífica y estamos disfrutando de excelentes presentaciones y discusiones sobre esta materia. Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes. En primer lugar, queremos agradecer la cordial y gentil invitación para participar en esta reunión. Mi nombre es Alejandro Rivera, soy coordinador del área de fiebre aftosa en el Centro Panamericano de Fiebre Aftosa, Brasil. Y me corresponde presentar a ustedes el tema Banco Regional de Antígeno y Vacunas de Fiebre Aftosa, Banbanco. En primer lugar, quiero presentar un contexto en el cual hemos elaborado este proyecto. Primero queremos decir que la mayoría de los programas de contingencia para el control de un brote de fiebre aftosa en los países de Sudamérica considera la vacunación de emergencia como una medida prioritaria para responder frente a una introducción de fiebre aftosa. Sin embargo, con la excepción de un país, ningún otro país miembro de la Comisión Sudamericana para la Lucha contra la Fiebre Aftosa está asociado a un banco de antígenos para enfrentar emergencias. Por otro lado, la producción de vacunas en la región solo cubre 2 serotipos, que fueron aquellos endémicos en la región, pero que actualmente solo circulan en un país. Y el riesgo actual de un foco de fiebre aftosa está dado por la potencial introducción de un virus de fiebre aftosa proveniente de cualquiera de los pools virales existentes y reconocidos en el mundo. Por otro lado, de acuerdo a la OIE, se reconocen 9 estrategias para el control de un brote de fiebre aftosa, sea para países que no usan vacuna como países que usan vacuna. Pero en estas 9 estrategias, 6 de ellas están asociadas al uso de vacunas para emergencia, a una vacunación emergencial. Por lo tanto, si un país no tiene acceso a vacunas para emergencia, evidentemente no puede usar 6 de estas estrategias y solo queda confinado a usar solo 3. ¿Cuáles han sido los pasos que se han dado en la preparación de este proyecto de antígenos regionales VAMPACO? En primer lugar, en el año 2012, durante la reunión de la Comisión Hemisférica para la Erradicación de Fiebre Aftosa en Santiago de Chile, se pidió a Panaftosa que establezca un grupo de trabajo que elaborara una estrategia para la creación de un banco. En la COSALFA número 40 en la ciudad de Panamá, en el 2013, se pidió a los países miembros de la COSALFA, entonces pidieron establecer un banco regional y que la Panaftosa elaborara un preproyecto. Algunos países también incluso colaboraron con dinero para la preparación de este proyecto y también proporcionaron expertos para su trabajo. En la COSALFA número 42, en Ecuador del 2015, se reiteró que era decisión de los países miembros de la COSALFA delegar la gerencia y la administración del futuro VAMPACO a la Organización Panamericana de la Salud y, por su intermedio, a Panaftosa. En la reunión de la Comisión Hemisférica para la erradicación de la fiebre aftosa celebrada en Asunción en el 2016, se pidió a la directora de la Organización Panamericana de la Salud que aprobara el acuerdo que establece el VAMPACO porque era un alto interés regional en la fase final del programa hemisférico de erradicación de fiebre aftosa. También en el año 2017 se hizo una reunión de seguimiento de una de las resoluciones de la COSALFA número 44, en la cual se discutió los documentos del VAMPACO y su presupuesto con los delegados de los países miembros de la COSALFA. Y en diciembre del 2018, Panaftosa envió a los delegados tanto del sector público como del sector oficial de la COSALFA los documentos finales revisados y aprobados por la Organización Panamericana de la Salud. Los documentos que conforman el VAMPACO son 2. Uno es el convenio constitutivo que define lo que es la gobernanza del VAMPACO y el segundo documento es el anexo número 1 que es el proyecto técnico del VAMPACO que establece las características de una serie de aspectos técnicos relacionados con su funcionamiento. No vamos a entrar en estos documentos. Ahora, en paralelo, también en la reunión del 2012 de la Comisión Hemisférica para la Erradicación de la Fiebre Aftosa, se pidió que la COSALFA estudiase los requerimientos de seguridad biológica y las condiciones necesarias que permitieran revisar la restricción que hasta ese entonces imperaba para el manejo de cepas del virus de fiebre aftosa exógenas a las regiones de las Américas. Así, el 2016, en una resolución número 1 de la COSALFA 43, ordenó revisar con expertos el manejo de cepas de virus de fiebre aftosa exógenas a la región. Y el año 2017, la COSALFA 44 recomendó modificar la decisión que fue realizada en la COSALFA número 28 en el año 2001, que imponía restricciones para el manejo de cepas virales de fiebre aftosa, promover también y fortalecer las comisiones nacionales de bioseguridad, recomendó crear la Comisión Regional para el manejo del riesgo biológico y bioseguridad de la cosalfa e implementar un marco regulatorio para el manejo de los riesgos biológicos asociados a la manipulación y actividades con el virus de la fiebre aftosa. Hablemos un poco de las principales características del bambaco. El bambaco es un bien público regional, basado en la premisa de que la fiebre aftosa es un desafío para todos los países de las Américas, y el cual puede ser abordado más eficazmente y efectivamente a través de acciones colectivas y mediante la cooperación regional. El bambaco adhiere al principio de la solidaridad entre los países. Considera que la introducción de la fiebre aftosa en cualquier país va a impactar a todo el hemisferio. Luego, el bambaco debe estar abierto a todos los países miembros de la Organización Panamericana de Salud, o sea, de todos los países de las Américas. El bambaco también fue una petición de la Comisión Hemisférica de Erradicación para la Fiebre Aftosa. El bambaco no tiene un estatus legal, sino que es la unión de sus miembros conformada por la OPS y las entidades de los países que voluntariamente firman el acuerdo, bajo las políticas y los procedimientos de la OPS. Los países pidieron que cuando se establezca el bambaco se encuentre bajo la gerencia de Panaftosa OPS, de acuerdo a las políticas y procedimientos de la Organización Panamericana de Salud, de manera de asegurar un carácter supranacional, internacional y neutral del bambaco. También los países miembros del bambaco deben financiar colectivamente los costos fijos de la gerencia y la administración del bambaco. Los costos variables corresponden a aquellos derivados de la adquisición de los antígenos, el control de estas reservas de antígenos y el desarrollo de vacunas en caso de emergencias que cada país asociado al bambaco desea conservar en el banco. O sea, los costos variables entonces van a ser variables para cada país según la demanda que ellos tengan de conservación de antígenos en el banco. Las reservas de antígeno y su eventual preparación van a ser mantenidas en al menos 2 laboratorios elaboradores de vacunas de la región que hayan sido aprobados por la Comisión Regional de Bioseguridad y de Riesgo Biológico de la COSALFA. La Organización Panamericana de la Salud tiene más de 30 años de experiencia con el fondo rotatorio, por medio del cual se compran vacunas, jeringas y otros elementos en representación de los países miembros participantes para sus programas de inmunización, asegurando una continua oferta de estos productos que reúnen estándares de alta calidad al menor precio gracias a las economías de escala. El bambaco va a ser un mecanismo clave para la región de las Américas, que es una referencia global en el éxito de los programas de erradicación de fiebre aftosa, mediante la inclusión en el bambaco de los antígenos de virus de fiebre aftosa exógenas a la región, adicionales a las cepas que han sido endémicas a la región. En esta lámina presentamos un esquema de la organización del bambaco. En la parte más alta presentamos aquí la Organización Panamericana de la Salud, que representaría entonces las políticas y los procedimientos por los cuales se va a regir el funcionamiento del bambaco. Luego tenemos Panaftosa, que es la sede del bambaco. Panaftosa, su sede es en el Río de Janeiro. Y en esta figura está representada la gerencia del bambaco en Panaftosa, que va a estar asesorada por la comisión directiva. La comisión directiva va a estar conformada por delegados o representantes de cada país miembro del bambaco, y también va a contar con un comité técnico asesor que van a ser expertos de los países miembros que van a integrar este comité técnico asesor que va a ayudar en las decisiones de la selección de aquellos antígenos que deben ser conservados en el bambaco. Los antígenos que se haya decidido conservar en el banbaco van a ser obtenidos mediante licitaciones internacionales bajo las reglas de la OPS, y estos antígenos van a ser conservados entonces y mantenidos en dos laboratorios, ¿no?, representados en estas dos figuras, que son laboratorios de la región, que son laboratorios elaboradores de vacunas para la fiebre aftosa. Los antígenos y eventualmente las vacunas van a ser controladas regularmente por el laboratorio de referencia de fiebre aftosa dependiente de panaftosa. Además, la gerencia va a cumplir una labor de coordinación y de construcción de relaciones con la red de bancos de antígenos y vacunas de fiebre aftosa internacionales existentes en el mundo. Hablemos algo de los costos fijos, ¿no? Repetimos, los costos fijos del banbaco están asociados esencialmente a la gerencia y la administración del banbaco, y son financiados por las contribuciones que van a hacer los países miembros. Potencialmente hay 35 países del continente americano que pueden suscribir el banbaco. El monto de estos costos fijos tiene que ser aprobado por la comisión directiva. Los costos fijos para el primer año de operación del banbaco han sido estimados del orden de los $120.000, que incluyen la contratación de un gerente y un asistente, un fondo de contingencia y los costos de administración que cobra la Organización Panamericana de Salud. Decimos que no hay barreras de entrada para el banbaco. El banbaco, para que sea constituido, tiene que tener la concurrencia de al menos 3 países miembros. Hasta el momento no tenemos la concurrencia ni la firma de los 3 países miembros. Sí sabemos del interés de varios países de participar, pero hasta ahora no tenemos la firma para constituir el banbaco. Ahora, si al menos 3 países miembros se constituyen, entonces las mismas reglamentos disponen de que la comisión directiva, como formada por un delegado de estos países miembros, va a definir el monto del costo fijo para iniciar las actividades, y también va a definir cuál es el porcentaje que cada país miembro va a contribuir a cubrir este monto fijo. Entonces, decimos de que a mayor número de países miembros que inicien el banbaco, menor va a ser la contribución de cada uno. Y el porcentaje que cada país miembro va a contribuir a cubrir estos costos fijos va a ser el resultado de un acuerdo de la comisión directiva. No es de la OPS, ni es de panaftosa, ni es de la gerencia. Entonces, una vez que esa decisión ha sido tomada por la comisión directiva, esa contribución de cada país miembro entonces tiene que ser pagada para iniciar el trabajo del banbaco. Finalmente, ¿por qué necesitamos el banbaco? Porque nos garantiza acceso a vacunas de alta calidad en menor precio, porque ayuda a la sustentabilidad financiera de los programas de prevención nacionales de fiebre aftosa, porque promueve una rápida y equitativa entrega de vacunas para la fiebre aftosa en caso de una emergencia sanitaria. ¿Cómo el banbaco trabaja? Ayudando a los países a estimar sus necesidades de vacuna en caso de emergencia, consolidando órdenes de compra de antígenos que pueden ser licitadas en un paquete y obteniendo menores precios, y coordina y monitorea los envíos. ¿Cuáles son los beneficios para los países? Asegura una oferta confiable y continua de vacunas y provee vacunas que son seguras, efectivas y de alta calidad. Crea economías de escala que permiten hacer compras con el menor precio posible. ¿Y cuáles son los beneficios para los proveedores? Provee un único punto de acceso para los países participantes en el banbaco, facilita la planificación de la producción y garantiza el pago a tiempo y una demanda sustentable. Muchas gracias por su atención. Muy buenas tardes. En primer lugar, queremos agradecer
Okay, we invite Keith to make present the next speaker.
I'm happy to do that, but the host has stopped my video.
Oh, why?
But
okay.
Also without my video, I hope this will be start my video.
Yeah, it's fine. Now we can see you.
Okay, good. Great. Thanks, Alejandra. I would like to introduce Dr. Jamie Barnaby. She joined the USDA Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center in January of 2017. She previously held the position of Staff Veterinary Medical Officer for VEDL, and most recently that of a VMO within the North American Foot and Mouth Disease Vaccine Bank. She will explain everything about that. She currently acts as the technical representative for the US on the NAFMDVB's Vaccine Bank Technical Group. In May of 2020, she accepted the position of manager for the new bank. Dr. Barnaby is an epidemiologist on one of USDA's 5 national incident management teams. She is currently deployed with the Federal Emergency Management Agency to support COVID-19 vaccination efforts. So she's quite busy with that, I suppose. And she enjoys educational outreach and regularly engages in trainings for veterinarians and students in transboundary animal diseases, and also sustainable project implementation and emergency response. Well, we look forward to her talk, and the floor is yours, Jamie.
Thank you very much for the introduction. All right. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be able to present to you today on the United States Department of Agriculture and its vaccine banks, as they truly are a critical component of our strategic risk mitigation against an introduction of foot and mouth disease virus to the United States. As a little bit of background about myself, my name is Dr. Jamie Barnaby, and I am the manager of our National Animal Vaccine and Veterinary Countermeasures Bank. I also hold a position as an epidemiologist on one of our 5 national incident management teams. I apologize a little bit for my voice. I'm currently mobilized to support some COVID-19 vaccination efforts. And as it turns out, being outside in 95 means that I do a lot of shouting. So bear with my voice through the course of the presentation. I thought I would begin by giving you all a little background on the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory, or FADL, as the vaccine banks that I'm going to talk to you about today are administratively and physically co-located with FADL in the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, located on Plum Island, New York. Now, FADL at its heart is a diagnostic laboratory, but its scientific mission is broader than that. So primarily, yes, we're responsible for testing samples from animals across the United States who exhibit clinical signs consistent with a foreign or transboundary animal disease. However, FADL also maintains not 1, but 2 foot and mouth disease vaccine banks for North America. One of those banks is specific to the United States. We are involved in a number of international collaborations. We train US and international veterinarians and diagnosticians in the recognition, sample collection, and detection of a variety of high consequence transboundary animal diseases. We're continually developing or optimizing our diagnostic assays, as well as the reagents that accompany those. We will safety test animal products, as well as live animals if needed prior to importation to the US. And we are an authorized rinderpest holding facility for the World Organization for Animal Health, or the OIE, as well as the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO. Now, in addition to serving as a reference laboratory for those 2 entities, we also domestically are the reference and confirmatory laboratory for our National Animal Health Laboratory Network, or NALN. Now, this is a network of approximately 60 state and university associated laboratories scattered across the country who are proficiency tested to run the same PCR-based assays that FADL does for these foreign or transboundary diseases. And this network is there to support us in a surge capacity should it be needed in an outbreak setting. Let's jump into a little more detail on our Anagen banking efforts. The first bank that I would like to speak to you about truly needs no introduction. I imagine most of you are well familiar with this bank, but it is the North American Foot and Mouth Disease Vaccine Bank. And this bank was established in 1982 from a memorandum of understanding between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And I regret to inform you that due to some pretty extreme budgetary cuts, Mexico did withdraw from the North American Bank in November of 2020. However, the United States and Canada remain committed to the North American Bank mission and are actively participating in the bank to this day. This bank is managed by Dr. Hernando Duque, and the goal of this bank has been to ensure the availability and readiness of vaccines if needed to control an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in North America. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our second vaccine bank, the National Animal Vaccine and Veterinary Countermeasures Bank, or the Navvcb. For simplicity's sake, I will refer to this bank as the US Bank as a way to easily distinguish it from the North American Bank. And this bank is part of an entirely new initiative for USDA APHIS. And APHIS is our Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. So this bank was established through the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill in Congress. And what this bill did is allot $150 million across 3 pillars of animal health and preparedness. So the NALN, that National Animal Health Laboratory Network, is a part of this. And the rest of the funding went to stand up 2 new programs. One of those is the National Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Program, or NADPREP, and that supports, it provides funding to support states' preparedness, exercises, drills, other initiatives that they may have. And then lastly, we have the new US Bank. So I would like to emphasize that this is specific to the United States. We do not have international partners in the US Bank, although again, this is a global initiative when it comes to these diseases. I think you're all aware. And this bank is not a replacement for the North American Bank. So the United States will continue to participate in and manage the North American Bank as it has done since its inception in 1982. Thus, the goal of the US Bank is to ensure the additional availability and readiness of vaccines if needed to control an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the United States. In addition to that, we intend to look beyond stockpiling FMD vaccine antigen concentrate to also evaluate the availability and feasibility of stockpiling other countermeasures as well as diagnostics for a variety of high consequence transboundary animal diseases. When we go to make our recommendations for the next round of acquisitions for either bank, they truly operate pretty similarly, and that they both have a technical team that is convened for discussions on what strain should we be looking for next. To begin with the North American Bank, this technical team is run by Dr. Hernando Duque, and each of the countries has 3 members. So both the US and Canada have a technical representative, a policy representative, and a regulatory representative invited to these meetings. We also have the flexibility to invite subject matter experts if needed to help answer some questions or to facilitate conversation. The US Bank has a similar structure, although, as I said before, everything is internal to USDA at this point. So the idea was we'd like to get a broad representation from stakeholders within and across USDA, APHIS, and veterinary services to get their input on these products. So as an example, on this slide here, you could see that this particular meeting group would convene representatives from our Field Operations Division, or FIOPS. This could be incident commanders, it could be field epidemiologists. We could pull direct expertise from within our National Veterinary Services laboratories, whether FADL itself or our sister laboratories located in Ames, Iowa, and that lets us lean on that diagnostics expertise. We continually have representation from our Center for Veterinary Biologics. They are critical to helping us determine the likelihood that a product could be approved for or permitted for use in the United States versus fully licensed for use in the United States. That factor is very important to both of these banks, as a product that is licensed for use in the US prior to the time that we need it in an emergency situation, very valuable. This could also pull in representation from our Centers for Epidemiology and Animal Health, or CIA, potentially from the surveillance unit or the modeling unit. And then Dr. Duque has a standing seat on this committee as I hold representation on his committee as the technical representative for the US. So we really do work very closely together to lean on each other from an expertise standpoint and to leverage any potential synergies between the similar work that these banks are doing. Now, when these teams are convened, the type of data that they're considering at any given point, I mean, this list is not exhaustive, but it gives you an idea. And it goes without saying that epidemiology is the foundation of these decisions. So understanding the global situation, where the virus is circulating, how it's changing, whether or not our vaccines are still providing adequate coverage is really, really a big piece of this discussion. We could also incorporate modeling data if it were relevant to the discussion, diagnostic results, including sequencing data, whether those are within cattle or from another laboratory within the network, for example. Historical antigen and vaccine test data that we have provides us a beautiful background on how these products have performed historically, as well as allowing us to look at how we think they may continue to perform in the future. We also repeatedly reach out to manufacturers for data on vaccine efficacy, pharmacovigilance data. I'm preaching to the choir when I say there is no good substitute, right, for seeing how a vaccine behaves in an animal in the field that is infected under a natural challenge situation. So anytime we can get that, we love to have that information available to us. Peer-reviewed literature, also very important, and we are keenly interested in studies on cross-protection. So if you have any new studies coming out, we'll be excited to see them. And then lastly on here, I did highlight collaboration. We all have a focus on these diseases from within our national context and to protect our agricultural sectors, and that's important. But I think we all recognize too that these diseases, with their transboundary nature, are a global problem, not necessarily solely a national one. So collaboration to help us further knowledge on this virus and its behavior and enhance our ability to lean on one another to, improve the science and help us all make strides toward eradicating this disease cannot be understated. With that in mind, anyone who is interested in collaborating with us on projects or having a few discussions, getting to know each other better for future projects, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Now, these teams, to dive back into it, once they've evaluated the available information, they will come up with a recommended list of strains for acquisition. We also have a new tool available to us in this endeavor, known as the Pragmatist. And this really allows us to take that risk and make it very specific to North America or the US, depending on the technical team that's involved. Now, this tool was developed by the EuFMD and the World Reference Laboratory for Foot and Mouth Disease and truly supports those individualized risk assessments. Now, I have 3 areas in terms of the data that I wanted to highlight to you all, and this is a high-level summary. The tool is very detailed and quite complex. It's a nice thing to have available to us. So this bullet that is in red, the source area score, as you can see here on the right side of the slide, there are 8 source areas. What this allows us to do is we have the most flexibility to play with our data here. We can weight these source area scores based on our perceived risk or possible risk for importing FMD through one of these areas. And then we get to assess those source area scores within light of data that are already present within the Pragmatist itself, such as circulating strain data across the 7 pools, as well as the quality of a vaccine match to those circulating strains. Once we've gone through and weighted those scores, we then end up with something that looks like this, the manager tool summary. And this allows us to, after we've input information on strains that are already included in the banks, we have our source area scores weighted, we now get this picture of the overall risk and what coverage we have based on our strain selection. So not only can we see where we currently stand with what's in the bank, it also allows us to play around with, well, what if we selected this product next? What does that do to our risk coverage within a serotype or across the spectrum? So this is a really, and excuse me, again, I'm gonna end up losing my voice. This is a really excellent tool for us to have as bank managers. But lastly, I would cover a few points on bank testing. For you all, our Center for Veterinary Biologics provides guidance to us on the purity, safety, quality standards for any biologics permitted or licensed for use in the United States. And then on top of that, we also follow the OIE's recommendations for FMD emergency vaccines. Now, we begin by generally reviewing data provided by our manufacturers after we've purchased a new antigen. As you can imagine, we like to assess the production process and the steps along that quality control and assurance process. So information typically supplied to us includes inactivation kinetics, the innocuity test results, antigenic mass, for those 146S results, as well as information on the serology of vaccinated animals. Sometimes we're fortunate enough to have this be a challenge test, sometimes not. So we do interpret that serology in light of whether or not these animals were challenged or solely vaccinated. We do request our own samples to do our own 146S or antigenic mass testing. If you're not familiar with this test, it is a proxy for the potency of a product. And I know, again, preaching to the choir here, you're all aware that it is that complete virion, that capsid, that makes our current vaccine products work. Without that capsid, we don't get any immune response to the vaccine. So being able to measure, right, or approximate the mass, the quantity of those capsids available in this product gives us an idea of how potent this product is. The way that we do this is we layer our antigen sample on top of a series of sucrose gradients ranging from 15 to 55%. We ultracentrifuge those samples and we can isolate viral particles because that S in 146S stands for Svedberg units. That is a sedimentation constant. And we know, based on the size of the FMD virion, more or less where they're going to settle out in the solution. So if you can appreciate this blue line here, that's what you're looking at. Those viral particles isolated within that gradient, approximately a third of the way up the tube. Then we collect fractions from this. We put those into a spectrophotometer, and we can plot out the optic density values at a known wavelength. It gives us this image over here, this graph to the right. We take the average of 3 samples. A 4th sample was treated with acetic acid to degrade those virions so that this functions as our negative control or our baseline. Once we calculate the area under this curve, that approximates to the antigenic mass of that concentrate sample. And we compare that against what the manufacturer reported for theirs. It gives us that measure of initial potency. Yes, we're happy with it. We accept it. And then we can repeat this on an annual basis to really measure the stability of this product over time. Now, our gold standard for potency testing currently is a PD50. This is the protective dose in 50% of the population, and this is an in vivo test. It requires the use of 17 animals, 3 groups of 5 vaccinates. The first group gets a full dose, the second group gets a quarter dose, and lastly, we have a 1/16th dose group plus 2 unvaccinated controls. After vaccinating the 15, we come back 21 days later and challenge all 17 with 10,000 bovine infectious doses. They're then inspected over the course of the next 8 days to look for vesicle formation in their feet. We need both of our control animals to exhibit generalized disease, meaning we need to see vesicles in at least 3 of the 4 feet to conclude that the test is valid to make conclusions about the performance of the vaccine. Now, assuming they generalize and we calculate up the number of other animals who exhibited vesicles on the feet, we would consider an emergency vaccine satisfactory if it contains at least or greater than 6 PD50s. In summary, because I know I'm at my 15-minute mark and I apologize, data are everything. We are constantly hungry for information on viral circulation, how that virus is changing, and assessing all of that in light of changing technologies, whether it be related to the detection of this virus in the field or the novel vaccine platforms that we see emerging on the horizon. That all feeds into the larger beast of epidemiology. Again, the foundation of how we make our decisions. That epi informs our response that hopefully leads us to make the most scientifically sound and risk-based decisions that we can. Now, thank you all for your time and attention. I would also like to specifically thank Dr. Kim Dodd as the FADL director, Dr. Hernando Duque as my fellow bank manager, the rest of the vaccine bank teams, EuFMD and GFRA, as well as Teresa de los Santos and Alejandra Caposo. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's been fun. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute, and I will happily answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Well, thank you, Jamie, and we will follow the presentations. This time, we will hear the presentation from Ana Tafarel. Ana is a veterinarian. She has a degree in the veterinarian school at the and she works at the reference laboratory for in Argentina, in Buenos Aires.
I think you are both frozen. Ana? Okay. I think some problems with the connection and some noise from your side. So if it is okay, we should go directly to the presentation, trying to solve those issues, and then we come back, okay?
Hola a todos. Bueno, primero quiero agradecer por la invitación a la participación de este encuentro. Mi nombre es Ana Tafarel, trabajo en el Laboratorio de Referencia de Fiebre Aftosa, perteneciente a la Dirección General de Laboratorio y Control Técnico del SENASA. Bueno, como todos saben, es importante mantener un banco de antígenos. Como dice en la resolución europea, la vacunación es una herramienta fundamental en una estrategia de control y erradicación de las principales enfermedades emergentes. Los bancos de vacunas y de diagnóstico mejoran la viabilidad de la vacunación de emergencia al garantizar suministros si no hay una alternativa inmediata. Bueno, respecto a los antecedentes y la experiencia previa, todos sabemos que los bancos de antígenos y vacunas en los últimos tiempos han ido ganando mayor importancia. Los últimos brotes que hubo en América del Sur fue el último en el año 2018 en Colombia y en particular en el Cono Sur, donde se encuentra la Argentina. El último brote fue el de Paraguay en el año 2011. Esto se suma a la acción del Plan PEFA 2021-2025, que su plan es el levantamiento de la vacunación de la fiebre aftosa. Esto es mayoritariamente para ganar mayor mercado internacional y poder exportar más. Y bueno, dado la situación global que existe de intercambio de personas, no solo de personas, sino también de animales y subproductos animales, y donde también se ve un movimiento transpules de las cepas, son todos factores de riesgo y preocupación que ponen en mayor relevancia en lo que es el mantenimiento y la actualización de un banco de antígenos y vacunas. Respecto a la experiencia propia argentina, voy a hablar del rol del banco de antígenos argentino en el brote del año 2000. El banco en esta oportunidad fue relevante para poder llegar a una solución rápida. En el brote del año 2000 se desarrollaron y ampliaron vacunas seguras que indujeron protección contra las cepas de campo, lo que permitió realmente un control rápido de la enfermedad. Si podemos comparar los gráficos de barras que estamos mostrando, podemos ver cómo en el control del brote del año 2000-2001, con las vacunaciones estratégicas en 11 meses se redujo el brote, cuando en tiempos anteriores esto tardaba muchísimo más tiempo en lograrse, hasta 4 años. Es importante destacar también que en el momento del brote del año 2001 se incorporó una cepa aislada de campo a la vacuna, que fue la cepa argentina 2001. El éxito del control de la fiebre aftosa en Argentina ha sido el resultado de la coordinación de actividades de las diferentes instituciones locales, como fue el SENASA, el INTA, el CEBAN, las asociaciones de agricultores y el Banco de Argentino de Antígenos y Vacunas, porque trabajamos conjuntamente para realizar la caracterización de las cepas, el estudios epidemiológicos, el desarrollo de las vacunas, así que bueno, eso fue una experiencia ganada. Respecto a lo que es el marco normativo del Banco Argentino de Antígenos, voy a hablar rápidamente de la Ley 24.305, que aplica que el Servicio Nacional de Sanidad Animal es la autoridad de aplicación y organismo rector encargado de planificar, ejecutar y fiscalizar las acciones de lucha contra la fiebre aftosa. El Banco Argentino de Antígenos, lo que se hace por las distintas resoluciones que ahí están marcadas, se hace una licitación pública para el que quiera ser tenedor del banco de antígenos. En el año 2000 se hizo esa licitación número 399 y se le adjudicó a la firma Biogénesis la adquisición y antígenos concentrados. Esto a lo largo, en el año pasado, en la resolución 806-2020, se mantuvo el otorgamiento de la conservación y el mantenimiento del banco a la firma Biogénesis Vago por un año y renovable por un año más. Es importante destacar que en la resolución 609 del 2017 se incorpora en el marco normativo el manejo de cepas exóticas, incorporándolas en los bancos de antígenos con expresa autorización de SENASA. Bueno, respecto a los bancos, el Banco Argentino de Antígenos, es importante tener en cuenta que planificar y tener una estrategia en tiempos de paz para poder actuar en una emergencia. Los bancos de antígenos se clasifican según su cobertura geográfica y también por la naturaleza del antígeno que contienen. El banco de antígenos argentino es nacional y contiene antígenos concentrados, ultraconcentrados, conservados en nitrógeno líquido y también vacunas listas para usar. Las ventajas de los bancos de antígenos que contienen antígenos concentrados es la rapidez con que esos antígenos pueden convertirse en vacunas, llegado el caso, comparándola con lo que sería producir la vacuna desde la semilla. También la otra ventaja es la flexibilidad en la formulación de la vacuna, eso dependiendo de los estudios epidemiológicos y también de las diferentes estrategias de vacunación que se definan, se pueden desarrollar más flexiblemente las vacunas, la vacuna final. Y por otro lado, es un punto importante la larga vida útil de los antígenos concentrados. Si lo comparásemos con una vacuna con producto final, una vacuna tiene una duración de una vida útil de 2 años. En cambio, los antígenos concentrados del banco han permanecido hasta 20 años. Obviamente que el SENASA controla estos antígenos anualmente, tomando alícuotas representativas del granel y se hacen estudios de esterilidad, físico-químicos, estabilidad, de masa antigénica, pruebas de potencia in vitro, pruebas de tolerancia en animales. Bueno, y también mantener un banco de antígenos permite la elaboración de kits diagnósticos de fiebre aftosa y enfermedades diferenciales y emergentes. Bueno, también quisiera aclarar que en la resolución, la 609 del 2017, en el caso que sucediera que hubiera elaboración de vacunas que incluyen cepas de virus no utilizados en la República Argentina, el SENASA realizará auditoría de todo el proceso y recién con el control de inactivación, claramente la vacuna podría ser liberada. Se realizan estudios de clasificación a caracterización de cepas y si hubiese un brote se procesa en el nivel 4 de bioseguridad que tenemos en SENASA y realizamos estudios de caracterización genética y antigénica de los aislados. La caracterización genética, se ha demostrado que las proteínas de la cápside, la BP1 es la más variable y la que contiene los principales sitios antigénicos, y el análisis de esta región codificante de BP1 proporciona información de las relaciones genéticas entre los aislados virales. Por otro lado, tenemos la caracterización antigénica, donde principalmente se realizan estudios de concordancia vacunal. Esto se realiza in vitro. En el SENASA contamos con diferentes pools de sueros de animales vacunados, ya sea con vacunas monovalentes o polivalentes o vacunas pilotos. Esto nos permite evaluar en estos tiempos de paz las cepas con esos sueros de animales obtenidos. Se evalúan con la cepa homóloga y con la heteróloga, y después tenemos los estudios de fijación de complemento. En el laboratorio realizamos la mayoría de todos los reactivos necesarios para la fijación de complemento. Tenemos la capacidad y producimos sueros hiperinmunes en cobayos de cepas homólogas, cepas vacunales, pero también de cepas exóticas. También podemos realizar ELISAs de anticuerpos monoclonales. Por otro lado está el estudio de los análisis de comportamiento biológico, porque no todo aislamiento viral de campo es escalable y puede llegar a ser incorporado a una vacuna. Entonces se realizan estudios de rendimientos de producción masiva de partículas virales. Esto es la capacidad de la multiplicidad de infección para ver si es factible o no la escalada y producción de la vacuna. Por otro lado, también estudios de estabilidad en distintas condiciones, ya sea a 4 o a 37 grados. También realizamos estudios de cinética de inactivación, es decir, después de la primera inactivación con BI se toman alícuotas cada 1 hora de ese antígeno y se va titulando en las distintas horas para ver cómo disminuye el título y llega a inactivarse. También realizamos aislamientos en cultivo celular. La línea celular más utilizada es el VHK. También inoculamos en ratón lactante. Inoculamos en ratón lactante para lograr el aislamiento viral. Se inocula de forma intraperitoneal y también para realizar la titulación en ratón lactante. También se realiza la producción de vacunas piloto y estudios de concordancia vacunal con esas vacunas piloto, que esas vacunas pilotos también tienen los mismos controles que una vacuna oficial, y cuando se lleva al campo y se vacuna a los animales, después se obtiene esos sueros de animales vacunados con esas vacunas pilotos y realizamos las pruebas de vaccine matching con la cepa homóloga y con diferentes cepas heterólogas que tenemos en el cepario. En la actualidad es esencial el mantenimiento de la capacidad operativa, es competencia del SENASA la realización de estudios de evaluación de riesgos para determinar el antígeno o la vacuna que se almacenará con un nivel de prioridad adecuada, y el conocimiento de nuevas cepas circulantes con monitoreo actualizado mediante pruebas de concordancia vacunal. Como somos un laboratorio de referencia, nosotros incorporamos cepas de otros lados y realizamos lo que decía, las pruebas de concordancia y estudios filogenéticos y de caracterización antigénica de estas cepas. La proyección a futuro es fortalecer grupos de trabajo de análisis de riesgos para la selección de linajes de interés que puedan ser una amenaza potencial para la región, es continuar con la caracterización genética y antigénica de nuevas cepas, y es fundamental siempre la colaboración público-privada, ya que el SENASA tiene la capacidad para estudiar las cepas, como hemos estado hablando, pero necesita de la colaboración privada de los laboratorios elaboradores, que son los que elaboran las vacunas, y por otro lado también de colaboración de otros organismos públicos como el INTA para todos los estudios que se hacen necesarios en estas situaciones. Bueno, eso es todo. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias por permitirme presentar y bueno, hasta luego.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your presentation. And I think this completes our session with all the presentations. And now I would like to invite you for the discussion, where we have two parts. During the first part, we will take questions of these vaccine banks presentations. And then in the second part of the discussion, we will put together the information that we got from the epidemiology data and risk analysis and vaccine banks, trying to connect both teams, because as you have heard, they are connected. So now I give the word to Mariano, so he can introduce the participants of this discussion.
Thank you, Alejandra. And please, I want to invite the rest of speakers, besides those that have their presentation during this session. I want to invite Rodolfo Bellinzoni, Danny Goebbels, and Dardo Chiesa, who are members of representatives of other stakeholders as the pharmaceutical industry, and also from the producers. So we will speak in English and Spanish, so please feel comfortable with which language you want to use. So I don't know if Keith, do you want to start with one question? Just throw one to the stage.
Yes, thank you very much, Mariano. I would like to put one question on the table that we have got several times, and that is that of course these antigen banks are impressive, but how have probably you have, but how have you worked out the logistics of manufacturing and deploying of ready-to-use vaccine? What is the lag time for deploying vaccine? And how, well, that's basically the question. And I would like to ask, I think Rodolfo and Dani Govaerts to start commenting on this.
Okay, Keith, I'm going to answer in Spanish. Nosotros tenemos alguna experiencia, como expresó Ana Tafarel, en la emergencia que hubo en Argentina en el 2001, y en aquel tiempo se lograba una capacidad logística, por ejemplo, de entregas diarias de 2 millones de dosis. Hoy por hoy, como miembros de la industria, y estar viviendo todo este proceso en el continente, en donde se está progresando en el control de la enfermedad, y hay ya lugares donde se está dejando de vacunar y se está hablando de los bancos de antígenos, como industria, digamos que tendríamos que tener en este momento una mayor visibilidad sobre las demandas que tienen que ver con tu pregunta, que podría tener el continente, y cuáles serían los distintos escenarios de emergencia y cuáles serían las cantidades de vacunas que se tendrían que proveer en cada uno de estos escenarios, ¿no?
Okay, thank you. Danny, would you like
Yeah.
to comment?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think in the discussion on vaccine banks, there is often one aspect which is usually not on the table or a bit overlooked. And that is as soon as one stops vaccination, that also has an effect on the manufacturers as such. You know, already see in Brazil, where the market is since a couple of years is shrinking, that even now already the number of manufacturers decline. And then that means that in a situation where you rely on a vaccine bank, in the short term, that will of course help you, because formulating, also as Jamie mentioned, formulating ready-to-use vaccine from available antigen is only going to take a couple of days. But usually these stocks are rather limited, because you need to have them for all of the different antigens. And if you have a relatively limited outbreak, like for instance, there was one in 2007 in the UK, then it is relatively easy to quickly act and to quickly control it if you're lucky. But if you're a bit unlucky and the outbreak goes out of hand, then you're going to be faced that you need millions and millions of doses. And that means that from your vaccine bank, you should be able to switch into regular production. And if you don't have the manufacturing capacity available, then that is a real threat and a real problem. And one should also realize that for vaccine manufacturers, participating in an antigen bank is of course commercially attractive. They're commercial companies. But at the same time, it's also good to realize that that is not the lifeline of a commercial company. It's a nice bonus from a commercial point of view, but the real commercial interest of a manufacturer is in regular supply, either to an endemic situation or to a regular vaccination program. And as soon as that disappears, then you will see automatically that the number of manufacturers and the capacity goes down. And I think that is an aspect that in all the risk assessments is a little bit under, it's not often coming to into the discussion. And that's, I also saw in the questions, a question from Tim Dool that also goes in that direction. And what will happen if the manufacturer 1 and 2 that you selected suddenly stops producing vaccine altogether? And I think in the discussion on vaccine banks, before they are really set up, that is definitely something that has to be discussed in the broader plan, also including with the manufacturers.
Alejandro, ¿querés hacer algún comentario respecto al bambaco y a esta pregunta de Tim Doyle? Creo que está silenciado.
Está silenciado.
Sí, lo que nosotros hemos trabajado con 2 líneas de trabajo en la región, que lo mencioné, que lo voy a indicar. Por una parte, entendemos que la región de las Américas es una gran productora de vacunas, tiene una gran infraestructura y tiene mucha calidad y es capaz de producir enormes volúmenes de vacunas. Y estaba bloqueada en la posibilidad de tener acceso a otros mercados, dado que tenía una prohibición de poder usar antígenos extrarregionales. Entonces, a partir del 2018 eso se abrió. De tal manera de que entendemos de que un banco de antígenos o de vacunas no le va a dar sustentabilidad a un laboratorio productor de vacunas porque tiene un interés comercial. Pero sin embargo, si tiene acceso ahora potencialmente a otros mercados que estaba bloqueado hasta el año 2017, ¿no? Eso le abre también otro elemento para sustentar su producción. Junto con ello, también sería el trabajo con el banco de antígenos, ¿no? Esos serían los dos mecanismos que hemos tratado de manejar en paralelo, porque entendemos de que solamente un negocio de banco de antígenos vacuna no es suficiente para sustentar una industria como la que de la magnitud que tiene la región. Esa sería mi respuesta.
Quisiera agregar un comentario sobre lo que menciona Alejandro. Nosotros, como mencionó Ana Tafarel, somos desde 2001 el Banco de Antígenos en Argentina y proveemos otros bancos. Y también tenemos experiencia de abordar mercados fuera del continente. Y en nuestra experiencia va a ser difícil, imposible, que las capacidades productivas que hay en Sudamérica puedan ser absorbidas en mercados de otras regiones, porque son regiones donde hay mucha competencia, hay en muchos países proteccionismo respecto a la entrada de otros laboratorios. Toma mucho tiempo registrar productos y entrar a esos mercados, e inclusive hay algunas cuestiones que tenemos que tener en cuenta acá en la región, que no existen marcos regulatorios armonizados para que la industria tenga alguna previsibilidad en cuanto a qué demanda va a tener respecto a los antígenos y a los bancos de antígenos que se van a establecer y a la capacidad operativa que se va a requerir y cómo se piensa que va a ser sustentable en el tiempo. Como menciona Dani, es un problema para la empresa ver a mediano y largo plazo sostener capacidades operativas que en realidad y en el negocio no van a estar presentes. Eso va a ir generando gradualmente una reducción muy riesgosa y esto no está bien evaluado en los análisis de riesgo desde nuestro punto de vista. Y también tiene que ver con la primera pregunta que hizo Kiss, cómo es la logística y la acción en una emergencia que no está todavía bien definido, no está para nada definido en Sudamérica, cuáles serían los distintos grados de emergencias que estimamos y cuáles serían los marcos regulatorios y las exigencias que va a tener la industria para atenderlos. Porque nosotros la tuvimos en el año 2001 a la experiencia que, si bien fue una gran escala, porque hubo que atender y vacunar en Argentina solamente, hubo también emergencia en Uruguay, Paraguay y Brasil, pero en Argentina solamente hubo que vacunar 60 millones de cabezas, pero si ocurriera en todo el continente, se me ocurre que podría ser mucho mayor. Y los marcos regulatorios no contemplan la velocidad con la que se tiene que lograr un producto y se tiene que entregar. Y todo eso hoy para la industria es incertidumbre y también es incertidumbre para quienes van a reclamar el producto en el caso de la emergencia.
Sí, unido a esta pregunta, otra de los comentarios y preocupaciones entre las preguntas previas que se habían hecho a la gente que se registraba era si había suficiente información técnica. Esto de hecho vino de parte de un productor. Si había suficiente información técnica que soportara, en términos de epidemiología y de análisis de riesgo, que soportara la decisión de dejar de vacunar en tiempos cortos, abandonar los programas de vacunación, y si esto no podía significar apresurar un poco los tiempos. No sé si, Dardo, querés hacer algún comentario desde el punto de vista de los productores. Me parece que sería interesante.
Sí, sí. Mirá, primero quiero poner en contexto para que sepan quién soy y de dónde vengo. Yo soy ingeniero agrónomo, fui presidente de CARVAP, la Confederación de Asociaciones Rurales de Buenos Aires y La Pampa, fui presidente del Instituto de Promoción de Carne y Vacuna Argentina, presidente de Confederaciones Rurales Argentinas, fui presidente de la FARC, de la Federación de Asociaciones Rurales de Mercosur, fui presidente del Foro Mercosur de la Carne y actualmente soy el vicepresidente, fui firmante del Comité Veterinario Permanente y miembro de Cuenca del Plata por los productores argentinos, y fui el que denunció la aftosa en la Argentina cuando el gobierno ocultó, lo cual me dio el título por parte del presidente de la Nación en su momento de traidor a la patria. Para que entendamos lo que significa para mí la lucha contra la fiebre aftosa. No es ni menor ni la vamos a entregar. Argentina tiene un sistema mixto, coparticipativo y solidario. Mixto porque lo bancamos, lo pagamos los productores, bajo la dirección del SENASA, compramos la vacuna, la pagamos nosotros, la repartimos nosotros, tenemos nuestra fundación de lucha contra la fiebre aftosa que se encargan de la cadena de frío y son las que aplican, y es solidario porque a los que no lo pueden pagar, la misma fundación se lo paga. A los productores chicos que no pueden hacerse cargo de la vacunación, se lo pagamos nosotros. Este sistema lo llevamos a Paraguay en su momento, y ellos hicieron las unidades ejecutoras locales, y es el mismo sistema, con lo cual en Argentina nosotros vemos con mucha preocupación esta ola nueva de dejar de vacunar. Para nosotros no fue gratis dejar de vacunar en la crisis del 2000, la pasamos muy mal. En Argentina se vendía 1 kilo de carne atado a un detergente porque no teníamos a quién venderle la carne, y nosotros no queremos volver a pasar por todo eso. Sabemos que tenemos un estatus de libre, sin vacunación, de libre con vacunación, y libre es libre, no debería haber peligro por circulación viral, pero la aftosa es una enfermedad social más que veterinaria, porque afecta de una manera tremenda a los productores. Ha habido suicidios en varias partes del mundo porque le han matado, porque un productor ha visto diezmado su rodeo por la fiebre aftosa. O sea que este tema de dejar de vacunar para nosotros no es menor, y no lo pensamos hacer, no pensamos dejar de vacunar. Nosotros todos los años tenemos un congreso de fundaciones en donde se evalúan todos los planes de vacunación, y todos los años validamos junto con el SENASA que la estrategia nuestra no es dejar de vacunar. Dejar de vacunar para nosotros implica una serie de riesgos, que la relación costo-beneficio de todo el amplio espectro del sistema productivo y social argentino es muy alto. Y les pongo un ejemplo. En Argentina hace muchísimos años que no hay casos de poliomielitis. No tenemos casos ni hay circulación viral del virus de la polio. Sin embargo, a los chicos de 4 o 5 años se le da el terroncito de azúcar con la vacuna Sabin, porque un chico con poliomielitis paga toda la campaña. Por otro lado, nosotros no hemos sido bien acompañados en su momento en la crisis de aftosa por el Centro Panamericano, y somos muy recelosos. En su momento a nosotros nos jugaron en contra. Nos jugaron en contra porque no encontraron lo que nosotros denunciábamos, y la situación de los productores hacia el Centro Panamericano es de absoluta desconfianza, y lo tengo que decir con todas las letras, y si no que me convenzan. Yo estuve en Brasil, yo participé, y no nos contuvieron en su momento. Y no digo que hayan sido cómplices del ocultamiento, pero no nos ayudaron absolutamente en nada. Entonces, este tema de dejar de vacunar es un tema bastante complicado. Por otro lado, la vigilancia epidemiológica en Argentina es muy complicada. Hay más de 25 millones de movimientos anuales de Hacienda, de cabezas. Un remate feria de terneros, concentración media, son 12.000 terneros, 15.000 terneros. Lo que pueda pasar si hay un escape de virus o algún problema en esas concentraciones a nosotros nos pega fuerte y nos pega mucho. ¿De dónde saldrían los fondos para la vigilancia epidemiológica? La verdad que no lo sé. Argentina, como todos los países de América Latina, son países con necesidades básicas insatisfechas. De hecho, el sistema mixto y coparticipativo es lo que la Argentina puede hacer porque lo financiamos nosotros. Yo dudo en que desde el Estado haya prioridades, como en su momento no las hubo, para vigilancia epidemiológica, para mantener un seguro como se pidió y para mantener otras cosas. Nosotros no estamos de acuerdo con esto. Hay un montón de cosas que me refieren a la memoria cuando nosotros dejar de vacunar. Creo, y se lo he dicho a las autoridades de Brasil, que Brasil se está aventurando Miren, cuando la política y la economía pretenden avanzar sobre la epidemiología, nos ha ido muy mal, nos ha ido tremendamente mal. Nosotros hemos decidido en Argentina que no vamos a dejar de vacunar. Ahora, viene la economía. Si Brasil deja de vacunar y empezamos a tener problemas en el tránsito de productos de Argentina hacia Brasil y de Brasil hacia Argentina por distintos estatus sanitarios, vamos a tener que empezar a pensar en dejar de vacunar. Lo mismo le va a pasar a Uruguay, lo mismo le va a pasar a Paraguay, pero no por un convencimiento epidemiológico de que queramos dejar la vacuna, sino por un convencimiento de que si queremos vender nos vamos a tener que aventurar en esto. Ahora, lo vamos a resolver en casa. Si tenemos un banco de vacunas, será el banco de vacuna argentino. No vamos a depender de un banco de vacuna ni del Centro Panamericano ni de nadie. Lo vamos a tener en la Argentina. Lo vamos a bancar los productores como hemos pagado todo. Y esa es la posición nuestra. Perdónenme si soy vehemente, tengo 30 años de esto. En el año 88 empecé a trabajar en el plan piloto Ayacucho con las primeras fundaciones porque la vacunación en la Argentina llevaba 40 años y nunca habíamos hecho nada. Fui fundador de mi sociedad rural y como verán, participé en todos los foros de la carne que puede haber dentro del Mercosur. Y sigo participando. Y mi entidad, que es Confederaciones Rurales Argentinas, me sigue manteniendo. Hoy soy coordinador de la Mesa Nacional de Carnes, de las 4 carnes. Entonces, creo que tengo algo de autoridad y algunos kilómetros recorridos como para poder hablar así. No me gusta cómo está encarándose el tema. Estamos jugando con... A ver, no es un problema sanitario solamente la lactosa, es un problema social. Nosotros desde Argentina no vamos a dejar de vacunar. No vamos a aportar a un banco de vacuna que no esté en nuestro territorio y si empiezan los problemas económicos por el tránsito de productos, por tener diferentes estatus, veremos cómo lo resolvemos.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Dardo.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this extensive comment. I would like to bring the discussion back to some of the questions that have been asked, and one is very interesting, I think, from Rebecca. It's about the ethical principles behind vaccine banks when it comes to a crisis and you have a large outbreak, a cross-border outbreak. How do you arrange equitable distribution of vaccines? I suppose in North America, this is not really an issue between states, but in South America, it can be an issue between countries. So, who would like to comment on this? Maybe Alejandro for Bambaco.
Bueno, ya lo habíamos mencionado, el Bambaco no está en funcionamiento, por lo tanto, esta es una pregunta que efectivamente es la administración del Bambaco que tiene que resolverla. Sin embargo, lo que puedo mencionar es lo que está hoy indicado en el documento constitutivo, que es el que está planteado a los países y que de alguna manera está consensuado con ellos, que plantea de que en el Bambaco, en el proyecto Bambaco actual, la conservación de antígenos va a ser propiedad de cada uno de los países integrantes. No es una propiedad común, es una propiedad propia de cada país. Cada país conserva la cantidad de antígenos que decidió conservar de acuerdo a su propia estimación que sería necesaria para enfrentar un brote. Entonces puede que un país pequeño, poca cantidad, un país mayor, mayor cantidad. Luego cada uno tiene derecho a ocupar su propia reserva. En ese sentido, ese es el orden de predación. Si tuviese que ocupar más que está también considerado de que podrá ocupar mayor cantidad de la que tiene en tanto la reserva esté presente en el Bambaco. Y hay un tercer mecanismo, también está indicado ahí, que si un país que no está adherido al Bambaco de la región, pero sin embargo está enfrentando un brote, ese país podrá pedirle al Bambaco apoyo, ¿no?, de emergencia, y va a ser la comisión directiva que deliberará de manera rápida y resolverá sobre proveerlo, considerando que ese uso tendrá que ser repuesto en un periodo que está fijado, me parece, de 3 meses. Esos son los mecanismos que hoy día este Banbaco tiene. Pero quiero decir que esos mecanismos perfectamente son revisables de acuerdo a lo que la comisión directiva resuelva al respecto. Esa sería mi respuesta. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And then one question, and then I give the floor to one of the other moderators. But a question from Aldo, I think. How is the coordination between all the vaccine banks that we have in the on this globe? I know, and I think I would like Jamie and Hernando to comment on this. I'm quite sure that they talk to each other when it comes to the North American vaccine banks. But how are the contacts with the South American Vaccine Bank and with the European Vaccine banks? And do you agree on criteria for inclusion of strains and that sort of things?
Okay, then I'm going to talk. I think it's some of the problems there are difficulties in sharing the information of which antigens the bank have. Then there is some possibility of sharing. We have a sharing agreement signed between the New Zealand and Australian Vaccine Bank and the US Vaccine Bank. But but then we don't know exactly which the other bank has. And even we don't know the amount of doses that they have. Then these things are very difficult. And I think we need to build a lot of trust for these agreements to be exactly like to exercise those agreements and be real. Yeah. That's it from me. I don't know if Jamie wants to add something.
Sure, thank you, Hernando. And I think that was well said. I know that from the perspective of the North American Bank, given its history, we are involved in the International Vaccine Strategic Reserves Network. And that's a mechanism for everybody to stay in touch and to discuss issues as they come up. But the underlying issue is just as Hernando had outlined it, sharing the specifics on the strains and the number of doses that we stockpile in either of our banks is not something that we share openly on our end. And it does certainly make things very challenging in terms of having those open discussions and looking at preparedness in a very frank and open way. And that concludes my comments on that. Thank you.
And maybe you can explain to me, maybe I'm a bit naive, but why are vaccine banks so secretive about this?
Sure, that's an excellent question. In a nutshell, I think it comes down to defense. From our perspective, if we all know that the possibility of agroterrorism is just that, a possibility that exists, and theoretically, someone who knew what we stockpiled, well, now they know what we don't have in our bank. And if they wanted to strategically hit us with one of those strains, I mean, we would be hurting. And so thus, all of the secrecy.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Mariano, would you like to take over?
Yeah, and actually it's for Jamie and Hernando, because one of assistant has asked about the inclusion of serotype C on the box showing the antigens held by the North American Bank. So is there any reason for that? What is the importance that you can attribute to this serotype for its inclusion in the bank?
Hernando, I will let you take that as it references the North American Bank.
Okay, yeah, we have to be, and Jamie mentioned that in the last question, yeah. FMD could be a biological weapon, and then we want to be prepared against any serotype, yeah. But we know that serotype C is considered not acting around the world, eradicated, but we have to be prepared, yeah. That's it from me.
Very good, thank you. One for Ana. I will do it in Spanish. Si las entidades regulatorias en Brasil y en Argentina permitirían a los productores de vacunas usar cepas no americanas, exóticas, para manufacturar vacunas para exportar. Yo entiendo que esto está permitido hoy en día, ¿no?
¿Me permite intervenir, Mariano? Sí, lo que yo señalé, quiero decir, es de que una prohibición que existía para el no uso en la región fue levantada, una prohibición que fue hecha por la COSALFA, por los miembros de la Comisión Sudamericana, los países miembros. Esa está levantada, por lo tanto hoy día sí los países pueden, pero hay una regulación al respecto. O sea, cada país, si quiere usarla, tiene que pedir una inspección específica para ese propósito a una comisión de bioseguridad y de riesgo biológico que está formada, de la COSALFA, para dar un visto bueno, para que esta sea aprobada, ¿no? Junto con esa inspección se haría con las autoridades nacionales. Luego viene el proceso de regulación interna, que no lo conozco en el caso específico de Brasil. Obviamente Brasil tiene una Comisión Nacional de Bioseguridad que funciona, y habría que entonces, esa autorización tendría que ser llevada a esa entidad para que finalmente sea aprobada desde un punto de vista regulatorio nacional. Pero antes de hacer eso, debería ocurrir el paso previo, que sería una inspección de una comisión nacional, una comisión regional, para que con la idea de darle seguridad a todos los otros países de la región de que ese uso se va a hacer bajo condiciones de bioseguridad óptimas, ¿no? Eso. Gracias.
Hola.
Bien. Sí, Ana, dale.
Sí, perdón, quisiera aclarar, acá en la Argentina las vacunas que se exportan a otros países son de cepas locales, de uso local, no está permitido la exportación de vacunas exóticas para la región, eso hay que hacer una actualización de las regularizaciones, ¿no? No está permitido hoy por hoy. Se está evaluando esa posibilidad, pero no al momento.
Y esta es una pregunta para todos los representantes de los bancos. Si en los bancos de vacunas se contempla la inclusión de las nuevas tecnologías o de tecnologías que están en el pipeline para las vacunas antiaftosa. Digamos, desde BLPs hasta vacunas vectorizadas, o hoy en día solo se contemplan las vacunas convencionales basadas en virus inactivado.
Hola Mariano, bueno, respecto a este punto, hoy por hoy la resolución, la 609 del 2017, está claro que las vacunas aprobadas por SENASA y permitidas son las que se están manejando en la actualidad. No hay todavía permiso para vacunas con BLP o vectores, pero bueno, es un punto a estudiar y evaluar. Por el momento no.
One related question then for you, Anna. And that is when we talk about inactivated classical vaccines with inactivated antigens. You mentioned, this is a question from Charles, you mentioned that the concentrated antigens, they have 20 years shelf life. And he wonders if you have data to sustain that.
Claro, sí, nosotros de esos antígenos ultraconcentrados conservados se toman alícuotas y se mide la estabilidad de forma anual mediante la masa antigénica. También se han hecho pruebas de producción pequeñas de ese antígeno ultraconcentrado en vacunas y esas vacunas hasta se han llevado al campo para vacunar a los animales y medir la potencia en forma indirecta. Así que sí, está siendo controlado y tenemos información y respaldo al respecto.
Perdón, voy a agregar un poco de información a lo que dijo Ana. Esos son los antígenos del banco que se elaboraron en el año 2020 cuando se creó el Banco de Antígenos en Argentina, que estamos trabajando en conjunto con SENASA y siguiendo la estabilidad de los mismos. Por eso es que a este momento se puede asegurar que esos antígenos siguen siendo viables a 20 años de haber sido elaborados.
There's a question from Aldo for Jamie. In many countries, 6 PD50 per dose are considered sufficient for emergency vaccines, in contrast to 3 PD50 per dose for normal vaccines. But in the laboratory, a VNT titer 2 times higher is not considered significantly higher. So this is similar in the potency test, the PD50. What should, in your opinion, be the minimal potency of an emergency vaccine in your bank?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so we do adhere to OIE guidelines to meet that threshold of 6 PD50s. I can say that we regularly see PD50s come in well above that threshold. Our most recent study, I believe, came in at 32 PD50s, and that it in fact may be above that, but that is the maximum that we can measure given this particular study design. And I think that when we look at PD50 and what is its intent to measure right across the population, that looks quite different in terms of a dose response, with that being somewhat of an exponential change in those numbers versus a simple doubling of something like a VNT that is very individual and specific to that animal or that small sample size of animals. That concludes my comments. Thank you. It was a great question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to you to continue, and Hernando also, but maybe it is under the Secrecy Act. I wondered if you only consider introductions from South America, or if you think that introductions from other continents could also happen in North America and Canada.
I'm happy to start with this one, and Hernando, if you would like to jump in, please do. I think to answer that, we absolutely do consider this from a global perspective with the way, and I think SARS-CoV-2 being an excellent example of how quickly we can move something around the globe. There are so many opportunities for introductions, whether that's through people, through animals, through a legal movement of animals, meat, you name it. It's absolutely a global assessment and not specific to the geographic connection with South America.
I think you are mute, Hernando.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't have anything to add. I think, we try to go the global situation and be prepared for the global situation. And I think now we perceive probably the risk from South America lower than before.
Great. Okay, Keith, I have two questions. I will formulate them in Spanish. They are for Alejandro. Ingrid Bergman pregunta en qué situación están los planes de contingencia y cómo se abordaría en cada caso en los países que piensan retirar la vacunación.
Sí. La situación con relación a la preparación de emergencia es un punto que fue enfatizado y está siendo enfatizado en el Plan de Acción 2021-2025 del Programa Hemisférico. Efectivamente, esta es un área que la región, particularmente de Sudamérica, que está en este proceso, debe prestar mayor atención. Eso incluye preparación de emergencia, planes de contingencia, bancos de vacunas, todo lo que tiene que ver con una respuesta apropiada para poder enfrentar un evento de fiebre aftosa basado en los riesgos actuales, basado en lo que hoy está ocurriendo en el mundo, que de ahí tenemos justamente evaluar los riesgos. En ese sentido, si bien todos los países tienen planes de contingencia, hay bastante variación en el nivel de desarrollo, actualización, detalle, ¿no? Porque tampoco existe, a diferencia de Europa, en Sudamérica hay ciertas guías nacionales, pero no hay una norma que ordene disponer de un determinado esquema de planes de contingencia, ¿no? De tal manera que en eso tenemos variación y eso es un área de trabajo. No está considerado, en este caso, que la transición esté condicionada a alguna revisión del plan de contingencia, ¿no? No existe esa norma. Si uno también examina la transición de libre con vacunación al libre sin vacunación, la única exigencia es el retiro de la vacuna, no hay mayor otra exigencia adicional desde el punto de vista normativo o internacional, de tal manera que no compete exigirla o pedirla. Sin embargo, es un área de trabajo que estamos trabajando en un proyecto justamente para reforzarla, porque evidentemente ahí hay brechas que tenemos que cerrar. Esa es mi respuesta. Gracias.
Gracias, Alejandro. Yo tengo una última. I have a last question that is from Miguel Jiménez Apiola. Miguel pregunta si, tanto para Alejandra, para Ana, para la gente que representa los organismos sanitarios internacionales y de los países, cómo evalúan el estado de capacitación de los equipos técnicos de los servicios sanitarios oficiales en cada país a la fecha de hoy, en términos de cómo evalúan, en términos de cómo pueden llegar a responder, si en términos de capacitación, de presupuestos, de atención a lo largo del tiempo, que esto no varíe en el tiempo, esta capacidad de respuesta. ¿Cómo ven ustedes ese aspecto del seguimiento del estado sanitario en relación a fiebre aftosa en la región?
Perdón, María, ¿no está referida a mí a la pregunta? No entendí.
Sí, la pregunta es si ven, digamos, cómo evalúan el estado de capacitación de los servicios, de los equipos técnicos de los servicios sanitarios en términos de cantidad de personal, de formación, de recursos disponibles, teniendo en cuenta que son elementos claves a la hora de desarrollar un plan de control. Ha habido circunstancias que fueron desfavorables en los últimos años, ¿no? ¿Han mejorado? ¿Se han mantenido? ¿Tienen alguna evaluación de eso? Esa es la pregunta, básicamente.
Bien, bueno, hay que fortalecer una evaluación de riesgo en masa, la capacidad está operativa, sí hay que capacitar para futuro nuevas generaciones. La realidad es que, bueno, también este año y el año pasado ha sido bastante complicado por la situación que todos conocemos del COVID, pero la capacidad técnica está. Obviamente siempre se puede mejorar y es la idea, y bueno, esa es la respuesta.
¿Me permites complementar, Mariano? ¿Me permites complementar brevemente?
Desde ya.
Gracias. Mira, no es una opinión nuestra ni un técnico, es un trabajo que hicimos hace 2 años, entre el año 2017 y el 2019, donde justamente revisamos estos aspectos, varios aspectos tanto en prevención, en vigilancia y también preparación para emergencia. En la región, en los países del Cono Sur, entonces estamos hablando del sur de Sudamérica, ¿no? Bien, breve. En prevención del país está muy bien. En materia de prevención y en materia de vigilancia existe bastante bien, y eso ya lo vimos incluso en las presentaciones anteriores. Pero vemos mucha más diferencia en materia de preparación para emergencia. Y cuando hablamos de preparación para emergencia, yo me remito a la respuesta anterior. Tenemos ahí preparación en tiempo de paz, planes de contingencia, capacitación del personal, entrenamiento, respuesta, banco de vacunas, todos esos elementos que entran en juego, ahí tenemos brechas por cubrir. Y eso es justamente, para sintetizar, Es una de las prioridades que tenemos que trabajar en los próximos 5 años de este programa hemisférico, enfocarnos mucho más en esta área que está con bastante atraso y tenemos que ponerla al día. No es porque no existan, existen, pero tenemos muchas brechas por cubrir en esa área en los países. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Ok, Alejandra.
Yes, I am just inviting all the speakers and moderators from the previous session. And the idea now is to discuss both themes, the risk analysis together with the vaccine banks. So we are open for the question discussions from the audience as well.
I think that one good question is which will be the resources needed coming from the surveillance system and feeding up the information needed for the antigen bank and how fast they will need to have this information. I think that is a question mostly directed for the antigen bank responsible.
Just to follow on that, Jamie, you've used the Pragmatist tool, which takes information about the global surveillance systems, the vaccine matching. Could you comment on the quality of the information available for that assessment? You mentioned about how important data is, and maybe we could think as a global group how we can improve the quality of the data and the research needed to improve the information available to the vaccine banks and their managers.
Sure, thank you, Melissa. So we have begun using and evaluating the Pragmatist to help us make these decisions. And I think those data that are present in the tool already in terms of evaluating the quality of the vaccine match relies a lot on our values. And I find that challenging in some ways, where to look at that, the interpretation of those can be incredibly difficult. But having said that, to have this available to us and allow us to play around with, if we wanted to include this strain, what does it do to our protection or our risk coverage across the board, is really an incredible asset to us. And I think it's just the recognition that this is a tool that needs to be updated on a fairly regular basis to reflect the changing evolution of this virus in the field, the actively circulating isolates, and how the vaccine performance may be changing over time with respect to that. Again, the same thing that we've touched on already is that the more we can collaborate as a global community to discuss things like this, the better that gets. And I say that recognizing that we have those certain limitations on our end. So I would be open to discussions on how to work around that to open up those communication channels in another way, if possible. I think, Melissa, does that touch on what you were hoping to address?
Yeah, and you mentioned, the limitations for our values, but I think that there's also gaps in surveillance globally. And do others agree with that? And how important are those gaps, looking at exotic strains coming into the Americas, North America or South America, from other parts of the world?
Yes, and maybe to add to that, also freedom from infection or absence from infection. How sure can you be about that? Also, for if there are any remaining pockets in South America, for example, in wildlife reservoirs. Would like anybody to comment on this? Maybe sensitive issue. But...
No, I think it's a relevant issue, and perhaps someone of the guys working in the epidemiology and risk analysis can perhaps address that. What about the reservoirs, or how to make surveillance to be really sure that there's not virus circulating?
Well, I'm gonna take these questions, Keith, Alejandra. Well, particularly in South America, the process of surveillance in South America is actually quite transparent, and actually there are also, although wildlife in South America is not considered a relevant epidemiological reservoir for FMD, there are studies on surveillance also involving wildlife. I think that because we are not talking for most of the countries about just a couple of years of being free, but we are talking in most of the cases of decades. I think that all built up as a combined time and different sources of surveillance to support the status of being free, when there is no transmission. Particularly, well, the process of withdrawing the vaccine is also helping to support that. There is less doubt when there is not immunity in the population, and anything underlying, you will be able to see it. Besides what you were talking in general, and Melissa, about the gaps of the information, I think that is actually, as an epidemiologist and working a lot in surveillance, I am actually happy when we have actually identified the gaps. Okay, in this region and for this period of time, we don't have information. My worry would be about the gaps that we don't know, the unknown knowns. That is more worrying, because when you at least has identified a region where you are not able to collect the samples, and you are not able to see actually what the strains are circulating, you can see, at least identify what are the risks around there, what are the movements of animals around there, coming in, coming out. Maybe in the area, you have an idea about what the strains are happening. Maybe here we have the example in what we have in Colombia a couple of years ago was reflecting what we have in the borders with Venezuela when we didn't have actually the data. So there are ways around, but identifying those gaps, like for example, in this particularly country, for that period of time, I don't have an idea about what the strains are circulating. I think that is already something positive, and maybe you can address it with specific studies and specific funding. But if you are able to map it out geographically and related to the time, I think that this map of gaps are also an achievement.
And from the GFRA point of view, we are all the time making gap analysis to see what research is needed, what are the gaps in research. So my open question will be, which tools are needed? What do you need the scientific community to develop to make vaccine banks better, to improve surveillance? What do you think as tools that we still not have, or that you would like better ones? Just an open question to discuss for everyone.
Well, ask and we can deliver.
Or we can find money to deliver. That's the way.
Maybe, for example, in South America with immunity studies, that I think that, as I expressed before, I found it very relevant. We have a way of testing a kit that is actually working, had been used for a lot of years. Maybe I would like to have that tool also that implemented worldwide, to have a better diagnostic tool that is easy to apply, that you don't need to require viral neutralization all the time to do that. To be able to apply to the immunity studies. We know what we have around here in South America, but I think that is probably something that it would be interesting for other parts of the world as a complement to working better diagnostic tools for immunity.
Yeah, we have been working on that, I think. Sorry, Keith, I just overtook. We have been working on that, and I think we also did a very nice analysis together with Andres some time ago, and we developed different assays, because the one that is used right now in South America is a liquid phase blocking ELISA, and you need to use a standardized serum for detection and for capturing. So you need to prepare like a specific serum for each strain. And we did it in a different way, and we did an avidity assay that worked really well and was very well matched for better than the R value that you estimate from the neutralization test. So I think that's a way to go. And we've been transferring this technology to the World Reference Lab, and we went to South Africa and Australia. But I think there's something we still need to work, because there are options, but sometimes everyone is stick to the old methods. So I think there are some other options coming up, and perhaps we need to pay more attention to that. Sorry, Keith, I give the word to you. Sorry.
No, I don't need the word, Alejandra, because you're the expert in this field and you just explained it. I have another question I think in the chat box to Melissa, I suppose. Is the data for pragmatists mostly from Asia and Africa, and do we feed in enough data from the Americas to make it useful here? Well, from North America, there are no data, I suppose, but Melissa, can you comment on that?
Sure, Case, thanks. For the pragmatist tool, there's different streams of data. The first one reflects the global surveillance data. So that would be the strains circulating in different virus pools, and there all the pools are represented. And then the second piece are how well the vaccines protect against those circulating strains. And for that, the vaccine data now is limited to some of the big commercial producers. However, the tool is intended to be flexible, and we would be very happy and keen to adapt it to include coverage or protection data from other vaccines. So it's a really simple tool, a really simple framework. It's just in Excel. So yeah, please get in touch if you would like to look at including other vaccines or to improve the strain circulation data that's in there.
Lisa, could you just a little bit explain about this tool? Because for some of us, we are not familiar with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariano. It's a tool that we developed at EuFMD together with the World Reference Laboratory, intended for this purpose to help vaccine bank managers make decisions about their vaccines. And so the user, it's in Excel, it's a framework, and the user has to identify which regions of the world pose the greatest risk in terms of being the source of an incursion of the virus. So you would rank according to the virus pools about which has the greatest risk. And then the second part of the tool shows which the relative prevalence of strains in those different parts of the world. And then the third part of the tool lists the vaccines and how well they cover against those circulating strains. And it's put together into an Excel spreadsheet, and the different strain, you can select which strains to include, and it indicates how well that risk is covered. So that's I'd be happy to discuss it and show you more how it works, or anybody at a different time.
Yeah, I think Charles is asking if vaccination heterologous challenge data can be incorporated to Pragmatist, like a tool to support vaccine matching. So it's related to what you were explaining.
Yeah, so the vaccine protection is really just sort of indicated as a score about how well the vaccine would protect against a certain strain. So between 0 and 100, given given an outbreak of that particular strain, how often would the vaccine protect? So that could be, it could be in vivo or in vitro data taken into account that score.
Yeah.
It's something that could probably, you know, be a good candidate for research to improve on how to reflect that within the tool.
Yeah, maybe it's a very nice tool, I think. But apart from that, you always have to expect the unexpected. We have seen several jumps in recent years where we did not realize, for example, from the Indian subcontinent to the Middle East and so on. And well, let's take the UK outbreak in 2001. So I agree with Jamie and Nando that that the source of incursion can be from anywhere in a way.
Okay, I have a comment from David McKay regarding the vaccine banks. He says the two factors seems to now push strategy towards virtual banks, meaning contracts and manufacturers rather than the establishment of independent physical banks. One of the factors is the consumer and veterinary authorities that often require full licensing, which can be difficult or expensive for small independent banks to achieve. And the other one is to that this improves the sustainability of manufacturers who are needed in any case to produce the antigen. So that's something that I don't know if you want to, any one of you want to comment on this.
No, if everyone, because otherwise we need to close. But I would like to have a comment on what Mariano said, because it was something from the audience. So it would be nice to answer. Teresa, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the whole audience, what is actually what are the current possibilities of an alternative vaccine platform of making into the South American vaccine banks? Are there in South America, are there approved alternative vaccines that, although they are not banked now, could be manufactured and deployed quickly for storage vaccine banks? Does anybody know?
That's a good question. Perhaps Ana or Alejandro. ¿Hay alguna vacuna nueva aprobada?
Hola, sí, creo, a ver si entendí bien la pregunta. Al conservarse en los bancos de antígenos, el de la Argentina conserva antígeno concentrado, eso permite una flexibilización, una alternativas de formulación en la vacuna final, ya sea o un solo componente del antígeno concentrado o hacer vacunas combinadas. No sé si estoy respondiendo bien a la pregunta.
Sí, esa es una de las respuestas, pero también lo que preguntaba era si están considerando, si existen en Sudamérica vacunas alternativas aprobadas que podrían ser consideradas para inclusión en los bancos de vacunas. O sea, como las de BLPs o proteínas, o sea, proteínas recombinantes, vectores. ¿Existen en Sudamérica ese tipo de vacunas aprobadas como que podrían ser consideradas para ser incluidas en, aunque ahora no lo hagan, ¿no? En bancos de vacunas?
Por ahora esa posibilidad no está incluida en los bancos de vacunas.
Pero tienen vacunas aprobadas, tienen alternativas que ya...
No, tienen cosas en desarrollo, pero todavía no hay nada aprobado, digamos, por las
Claro, exactamente.
no hay registradas, digamos.
Exacto.
Eso, registradas era la pregunta.
No, no.
Gracias.
So, okay, well, I think we are in perfect timing for a closure. It will be just a short final words. I would like first to thank all of you. I think it was a fantastic work that we did all together, and the presentations were very nice, and I think we really addressed the audience. Maybe there are some questions that are not answered. They are still there in the questions and answers, so maybe we can just chat for a while and answer them. And also, I think the attendees are asking for those panelists that would like to share their emails, so please, you can do it. And I will just put a presentation now. Please don't go. It will be announcing our next activities. I think that's quite nice to know, because we have a very big audience today. So probably we can still have the same audience in the future. So I will go through the whole goodbye presentation, and then please everyone stay with the cameras on. We're gonna take a picture just to freeze this magical moment. Okay, so I will just share my screen for a while. Well, we've been through this first joint meeting. Luckily, it won't be the first. We will have more. Remember that we have been working together, these big organizations working on FMD, the GFRA and the EuFMD. And perhaps you have already heard, because you saw the plaques during the recess, but there's another meeting that we are hosting together between the GFRA and the EuFMD, and that will be on vaccines, and it's more focused on Asia, and it will be on the March 25th. So please go to the webpage and follow all the instructions to take part of that one as well. I think it will be very interesting. And just as I am the GFRA CEO, I want to share a little bit of what we are and what we do, particularly the Global Foot and Mouth Disease Research Alliance. We do a gap analysis every 5 years, more or less, where we try to identify research gaps, and that's a very interesting activity that we do. That's why I was also asking you about research tools that you need. We are now launching a research topic, and we will have an ebook shortly. That's in Frontiers of Veterinary Science. We also have newsletters where we share all our activities, and we have the annual meetings with very long discussion panels. We really love discussions and to give everyone a word. So this year, by November, luckily in person, we invite you all to Buenos Aires for the next GFRA meeting that will be held here from 1 to 3 of November this year. Hopefully we will be vaccinated, most of us, and hopefully we will be able to just get together in Buenos Aires. So it's just gracias and thank you all for being part of this effort. I will stop and also give the word to Fabricio just to close this fantastic meeting. I think it was really great. So thank you. Muchas gracias a todos. Fabricio.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. And I was really following with attention behind the scene. And I think that also we have to thank who is working behind the scene, because we have rapporteur Laura Lozano, Maria Cruz Miraglia, Sebastian Di Giacomo, and Maria de la Puente from EuFMD, and they are working behind the scene in taking notes and to make the report for this session.
They can turn on the cameras now. We want to see them.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all, and hoping to see you soon in a physical face-to-face meeting that I think that we all need to meet.
Yeah,
and
to drink and to eat together.
And in physical settings. Okay.
So if everyone turn on the camera, we're gonna go for the group picture. I think, I don't know who is taking it, maybe Alessandra or... So Sebastian, can you turn on your camera? Andres, for a while. Thank you.
My video host has been turned on by the host. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, let's see if I can correct that so you can take the picture. I need my glasses. I took off the glasses for the picture. Let me see if I can correct that, Sebastian. Okay. So, no. Okay. No, I can't. Okay.
I'm sure that the team already took hundreds of pictures.
Okay. Yeah, but I think that Nadia wanted us all together at the end to take a picture with all that. Okay, so if you already have the picture, I would like to thank you again. And hopefully we will meet again soon in person next time in Buenos Aires.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Adios. Gracias.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.